We are all pawns in this game called life. Some decide to move through the ranks by either gaining a uniform or becoming destructors and destroyers for the king and queen of their board. 3 of the girls decided no longer to play that game, but 2 were still in that game, made the right moves, and they were the last 2 standing.
I've seen all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way. I've seen all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way.
Take a straight and stronger course to the corner of your life. Make the White Queen run so fast, she hasn't got time to make you wife. 'Cause it's time with your time and this news is captured. Just remember that the goal is for us all to capture all we want. Don't surround yourself with yourself. Move on back to squares. Send an instant comment to me. Initial it with loving.
It's important for us. I mean, the reason we've agreed to do this is there's some misinformation out there, and that's been hard for us. And that's why we, as a family, talked about it and agreed to do this, because the things that are being said are 100% not true. There's not drugs involved. There's not some weird love triangle. Ethan stayed the night at his girlfriend's house, who was one of 5 girls who lived in the home. And it's just important that people let the criminal part of it try to work itself out, and that these kids, all of the kids were just really good, great kids. So, I mean, the light of the school, I mean, everybody knew them.
One of them, I believe, was his girlfriend was also killed. Is that correct?
Yes, Xana. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were in the same room.
Salutations, friends, and we are here with research paper on the Ritualistic Apologies, Exploring Crisis Communication in Fraternities and Sororities. Now, there is a lot to unpack in that intro, especially some of you may not know chess, which I will put in the description, kind of give you some information on that. Some people see that bishop as part of religion, which not really. It's more of, they're more known as the person who is the distractor or the disruptor. In my opinion, that was Dylan. You know, Kaylee wasn't staying at 1122. She was living somewhere else, and she kind of brought her back into that home. I used that interview of the Chapins, which was done on the 15th before the Moscow PD did their own press conference. I've always felt that interview was very off in a couple of different ways. In my opinion, it almost gave off like hostage type scenario, that they were kind of forced to do that. Like they were kind of forced to put the word out before it got out of hand. And that is why she mentioned how, you know, there were no drugs involved. No, there wasn't some crazy love triangle. So kind of getting the word out beforehand, because he was a member of Sigma Chi, as well as his brother and his sister was in a sorority. So kind of getting out ahead of that, which we'll learn in this paper. They have a terminology for it: cold press and hot press. When I first started reading this thesis, which it is it's well done, but it took me on a roller coaster, and we'll go through that of what I was thinking it was going, and it was not going there. So as I read this, and if you start feeling like your head starts to hurt as I'm reading some of these words, or reading what he's putting down, that's normal. That's normal. That means you're normal. That means you are a decent human being. If while I'm reading this and you're starting to get little pains in your gut for some of the information I'm giving you from this thesis, that is normal. That is because you're a decent human being. That's okay. If while I'm reading this, you're thinking to yourself, that's kind of clever. That's kind of smart how they do that. You're a piece of shit. You're a piece of shit. You're a parasite. And I rebuke you from using this information of any form, of any type, these crisis management type scenarios. And I found this thesis probably a few months back, and it kind of is going in the projection, the trajectory of this channel in regards to the Greek. And in this thesis, he calls it an industry, the Greek industry. If anyone who knows anything about industries within the United States, and if anything I say when it comes to puns or idioms, it's in regards to the Greek industry, the university, college and universities. That is also an industry within itself. I'm meaning towards them, not to the decedents. So if anyone knows anything about an industry, you're expendable, and it's very cutthroat. Unfortunately, there was a literal aspect of this in regards to 1122 Queen Road. Many of us believe that it was not one person who did this. It was definitely several people who are doing it or who did it, as well as the defense, which is looking into this. This channel is not about you're right or I'm right, you're wrong. This channel is about exploring the dynamics of what these decedents were a part of or within while residing within the University of Idaho, which is in Moscow, Idaho. We're not, oh, we solved the case. That's not what we do here. And many of you realize that. So I'm just putting that out there again. But before we get into this, I would like to look at the recent document of because this got me heated. This was making my blood boil. Not so much because of the misspellings, which is despicable. I mean, you're putting someone to death. And if this was me in that situation, and I'm finding the court documents that are putting me to the firing squad, what a nightmare. What a nightmare. You are a judge. You are the prosecutors. You are the state. You are setting a standard. And I don't know if they're just doing that to be in solidarity of the victims, of the ones who survived. I'm not quite sure. And yes, the defense definitely has had their fair share of misspellings. Absolutely. But that's his lawyer. Okay. You are the state. You are the judge. And I'm finding with this case, with Ms. Reed's case, as well as Delphi, the state uses the media and the public's reaction in order to decide where their case goes. That's not based on evidence or law. Like, if you have to use that strategy of using the media and people's words on them, then you don't get squat. You ain't got shit. You don't even have evidence. It's really sad that you have to base your case on what the public opinion is. You're pandering to a potential jury, not the facts, not the evidence, pandering to the reaction of the public. And this is what pisses me off, because we'll just right here. It's the 24th, plaintiff versus Brian Koberger. So here, it's this comes off as damage control to me. That the judge is doing damage control in regards to Bethany and Dylan, and how the public has reacted to their text messages and the 911 call. So DM and BF are the two surviving roommates of 1122 Queen Road. At the time the homicides were believed to have occurred, Dylan saw a masked intruder in the house and began calling and texting the other roommates, including Bethany. Approximately 8 hours after Dylan saw the intruder, Bethany called 911 from her phone. Before the court is the state's motion to allow the text messages by Dylan and Bethany, testimony about their conversations with each other about what Dylan saw in the 911 call. So we're going to jump ahead to the part that boils my blood. I think this is attempts to explain events. Like, come on. Is this done on a typewriter? Is that why you can't fix your mistakes? Adder girl. Adder, the female speaker, secedes the phone to DM. DM identifies herself and asks I-1. She can tell dispatch what happened. Dispatch responds by asking what is going on, and if someone is passed out, the exchange will not be offered for the truth. All the matter asserted and therefore is not hearsay. However, Dylan then states, I don't really know, but pretty much at 4 a.m., the state argues the statement is a present sense impression and or excited utterance because DM is trying to explain to the dispatcher what she saw while under the current excitement of realizing that her roommate is not waking up and something could be wrong in the house. Defendant disagrees, noting the event DM begins to describe what occurred 8 hours prior. He further argues it is not an excited utterance because she and Bethany had several hours to reflect on what she had seen and experienced at 4 a.m. Defendant is correct that the statement does not qualify as a present sense impression, while DM PCR Sunni perceive the events she is beginning to describe. the contemporary aspect is missing. She's attempting to narrate an event she saw 8 hours earlier. The excited utterance exception does not apply either. While DM is no doubt under the stress of excitement caused by realizing Xana is unresponsive, her reflective thought processing appears intact. She is starting to draw connections between Xana being unresponsive and what she saw and heard 8 hours prior. Something she has had time to reflect upon. She does not launch spontaneous into what she saw at 4 a.m. Rather, she asks the dispatcher if she can explain what she saw. Based on this exchange, it is clear her powers of reflection are quite active, thus obviating the purpose behind the exception. The statement is therefore not admissible and must be redacted. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. What I don't like about it is how he is being very empathetic towards her, even though he's not allowing it to happen, which I understand. Do you know how many rape victims would allow for a judge to be understanding and empathetic towards that? Or a domestic violence victim would love to have a judge be empathetic of their matter and understand that they may not be able to recall what had happened to them and not get victim shamed and blamed for being under the influence like how Dylan was. But you know what? The bushy eyebrows, even though she was under influence, we're going to allow that to happen. When so many victims of sexual assault were not given that credence or given that space to have that understanding and to be reflective and to be supportive within those matters. Now, if this was a sexual assault or DV, they would be shamed and told, sorry, not going to happen. Shouldn't have worn that skirt, shouldn't have drank that much, shouldn't have been alone, shouldn't. So this boils my blood. Granted, it is not admissible and must be redacted. Great, thank you. But the way he is being so like flowery and understanding, a lot of victims would love to have that type of support, and please be given any type of a restraining order. And doing so, and not only just get the restraining order, but to have judges actually comply with it and follow through with it and enforce it with their officers, making sure that they do that. Moving forward to the thesis. That really just pissed me off, just from the amount of cases that we have all learned, so on and so forth, throughout our years in life. Which is why at the end of this video, I am putting it's like 15 minutes, I want to say. Maybe 17. But it is a Caucasian male, I want to say between 65 and 75, who I am now going to demand, and I hope you do too, that all Caucasians of this age group, white males, bring this type of vibe only from now on. I only want this type of energy from older Caucasian males, like the Hiplers, the Bill Thompsons. Who's going to end up falling into that age group would be the Honk Brennans, the Lallies. From now on, you're going to have to follow the protocol and the policies and procedures of this older Caucasian male at the end of this video. From now on, take notes and follow suit. Okay. So with this video, or with this thesis, we are definitely going to do chapter 1, which talks about, it's the intro, the statement of problem, the purpose of the study, theoretical context. 2 is going to be the review of literature the purpose and rationale, the definition of crisis, corporate crisis communications and management. 3, the methods. We'll just kind of skim through that, which we should know the methodology. That's very important, so we'll see that. But all the other information we'll kind of just skim through. 4 is the data reporting and the case summaries we will definitely look into. The analysis of data and findings, we'll skim through this, and then we'll look at the appendix, especially when it comes to the clusters, the strategies, because we'll definitely look at the tweets and the Insta posts. This is the case study. This is what this person had used in order to develop his thesis on crisis management amongst fraternities and sororities. So, Ritualistic Apologies, Exploring Crisis Communication in Fraternities and Sororities, a dissertation submitted to the School of Graduate Studies and Research and partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy by Rafael Orlando Mateo, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which is our favorite states in a couple of our cases here, December of 2021. So this is a recent thesis in regards to crisis management of fraternities and sororities, which is a great trajectory of this channel in regards to the papers we have looked into thus far, which is hazing, victimization within the fraternities and sororities, peer victimization, as we went through before. The more that you identify within the group, the less chance of you becoming part of peer victimization. And when you become more of a individual, the increased likelihood of you to receive peer victimization. That includes the connection to the university as well. From what we know with the victims in this case of the Idaho 4, the 4 decedents, 3 of them were no longer highly involved within the sorority of Alpha Phi and Pi Phi, and Ethan was a current member from what I'm hearing through, and I've heard this early on, which I had forgot, that he was under a academic probation, and he was going to be able to be reinstated into the fraternity or get off probation, academic probation, which I find to be more true than not, more plausible, just because of that interview with his mom. I don't know if that specific one, but other ones she had said that his freshman year, he kind of just, he's not into the academics is what she had said, which, happens to a lot of freshmen in their year of their schooling. Even Tebow on the grub truck said he poo-pooed his freshman year as well. It happens to, I'm going to say, more males than females, but it's nothing to oh my gosh, to be all up in arms about. Some people are not as academically inclined, but at least when you try, that's the important part. So the title, Ritualistic Apologies, Exploring Crisis Communication in Fraternities and Sororities. The author is Rafael Orlando Mateo, and this is going to take you on a roller coaster. It took me on a roller coaster. So it's college-based fraternities and sororities provide members opportunities for professional, personal, and leadership development, and at the same time can create spaces that encourage behaviors that may lead to crisis. Currently, scholarships on crisis communication and crisis management in fraternities and sororities are limited, which is kind of strange to have that. I mean, this research is timely due to the number of campuses that host fraternities and sororities and multiple stakeholders impacted by each organization. This study used a qualitative collective case approach to examine the role of social network sites, SNS, in the formation of crisis experienced by fraternities and sororities. Crisis studied resulted from content shared by collegiate members that depicted them engaged in racist, culturally insensitive acts. Organizational responses during and after the crisis were analyzed using COMS, Situational Crisis Communication Theory, SCCT. Organizational official statements were examined using Benoit, Image Restoration Theory, IRT, and Media Ecology. Was used to understand how SNS facilitated problematic behaviors among collegiate members of fraternities and sororities that led to crisis. Findings expanded the crisis clusters category outlined in SCCT with the addition of the bystander cluster, which we have covered in this channel. We did a research paper on bystanders and how to help decrease interpersonal violence between not just members, but also relationships, and added environmental history as a third step to determine the threat of reputational damage. It was important for me to put that book that Scott Green, his crisis management of this area, which was a lot of people found that to be bad decorum, uncouth, capitalizing on the situation that happened there. It didn't land very well because a lot of people felt that they did not handle that very well or at all. And a lot of these crises can be prevented by owning your shit and taking care of it and being insightful and honest and correcting bad behavior. There you go. There's your crisis management. Where's my scholarship? And is it that easy? Yes. Sometimes we make things more complicated than they really need to be. Findings expanded the crisis clusters. We went through that. A new model to assess a fraternity's or sorority's potential to face a crisis was introduced. So acknowledgements to Bro Dana Williams, my fraternity brother, mentor, and best friend. From the day we met, you supported me and pushed me to be the best version of myself. You guided me into our beloved fraternity and prepared me to lead others beyond our chapter. Sigma is a gift that has taken me on countless adventures. This research is a product of those adventures, and I have to thank you for the inspiration. Even though you are no longer here physically, you will always live in the memories we made and the lessons you taught me. I will carry on till we meet again. So when I first read this thesis, I'm like, okay, maybe something happened to Bro Dana Williams, and this was a way for him to help mitigate so this does not happen again like it happened to his bro. But you will see. To my dissertation chair, you affirm the importance of my work studying crisis communication and crisis management in the fraternity and sorority industry. You pushed me to expand my understanding of the communication field in my own industry. Okay. I am grateful our paths crossed, and I look forward to continuing to learn from you. And this is about the feedback, the writing analytical skills, and then to my friends and colleagues in the fraternity and sorority industry. Thank you to everyone who supported this research. I appreciate your support with this project and over the years. I look forward to future collaborations. And part of me thought this was a very positive approach because of the last research paper we listened to when it came to bystander, how a lot of people or members, the alums, who would go on certain forums to really push the fact of how the culture within their industry needs to change in order to help stop some of this crisis mitigation, these communications, because it's giving the fraternities and sororities a bad name. It is not what it used to be, and we needed to go back to what it used to be, where it was more about the community, so on and so forth. So this is what I was thinking when I was reading this. And then here, to my loving partner, Chris, your love, care, and encouraging words have meant everything to me over these past months. You have been my number one cheerleader, And I'm very thankful I got to share this milestone with you. I love you. So I'm thinking, okay, he is gay, so is he breaking generational curses within the industry? So this was my initial thoughts when I started reading it. And then it changed. So he went through this. How am I going through all those? So let's go through the introduction. Chapter 1, Problem Statement, Introduction. The purpose of this study is to examine crisis communication and management among national and international college-based fraternities and sororities and how these processes were impacted by social network sites, SNS, which I feel this is a great thesis to listen to because of the amount of social network sites that were used within this case. Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook were heavily used by Dylan and as well as Bethany. And a lot of people are asking, why didn't they call 911 before they called other members over? Because that is part of their crisis management. This is part of their policies and procedures. And SNS is a highly accessible web-based platforms that allow individuals to create public or semi-public profiles with varying degrees of public access to connect with other individuals that share commonalities, create and disseminate content, and facilitate interactive dialogue. This collective case study examined organizational responses to crisis that unfolded primarily online. Sound familiar? Because of collegiate members of fraternities and sororities disseminating content via SNS that depicted them engaged in this particular forum, though, they're talking about racist, culturally insensitive acts, which many of these you may remember throughout the years because they did hit national news. And I will, while I'm reading this, when I go back and edit, I will show you some of the sororities and fraternities who address that as well within their social media platform of Instagram. Crises were analyzed using situational crisis communication theory, SCCT, and organization responses were evaluated using image restoration theory, IRT. The research examined the role of SNS before, during, and after the crisis cycle. The Greek letter fraternities and sororities have existed in colleges and universities in the U.S. for more than 235 years. In 2021, there were more than 2,800 four-year colleges and universities in the U.S., and a little under 800 of these campuses have active fraternities and sororities, which is a large amount. It's almost half. Institutions types range from private to public research to liberal arts, Hispanic serving institutions, HSIs, to historic Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. Some fraternities and sororities focus on supporting members along specific identities such as race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or religion. Some fraternities and sororities are affiliated with national umbrella groups. 6 national governing councils help organize and structure the collective activities of their member organizations. The councils are the National Association of Latino Fraternal Organizations, NALFO, the coordinating body of 16 Latinx national fraternities and sororities, the National Asian Pacific Islander Desi American Pan-Hellenic Association, comprised of 20 national fraternities and sororities established to support students who identify as Asian Pacific Islander or Desi. APIDA Panhellenic Association, National APIDA Panhellenic Association. Okay, I was reading the references. A coordinating body that sets standards and provides development for 10 fraternities and sororities that promote multiculturalism. Umbrella organizations for 9 international historically Black fraternities and sororities. The National Panhellenic Conference, a group that represents 26 national and international historically white sororities. And the North American Interfraternity Conference, a trade association representing 57 national and international men's fraternities. the majority of which are historically white organizations. Another category includes fraternities and sororities that are unaffiliated with a governing council. This category includes organizations with local, existing only one institution, regional and national structures. So even though they are expanding, are being more inclusive, to tell you the truth, I don't think it's because that they are being more open-minded and want to include those types. I want to say, unfortunately, it may be just the way that I guess some people say it's cynical. I say it's just the truth, or it's just being realistic, that they're just reaching out because it is an industry. You know, they're reaching out to gain more money, more stakeholders, because it is a white organization. It started off that way. It just reminds me of in my criminal justice how, you know, the fraternal order of, you know, the Academy for Police Officers is white. And yes, they try to be more inclusive of adding members within that department that kind of reflect the community. But even though they have more Black or more Latina, it's still, the foundation is white. You know, it's not going to be more open and be understanding of the socio-economic or the socio-dynamics of that community. It's still just going to be white. Just like with what we're seeing right now with the court system, how it is still the same. It has not changed. It is very corrupt. It is not malleable in any way, shape, or form. This is how we do it. This is how it's done. Sorry that you were assaulted. Sorry that you're being stalked. Sorry that we make up the rules and you're just not a part of it. That's just how it is. And it is, I have to say, slowly changing. It has shifted some, which is a positive momentum, but that takes time and it takes consistency on our end to keep being aware and speaking up on it. So, moving forward. While fraternities and sororities provide members opportunities for involvement in their communities, personal and professional growth, as well as leadership experiences, they foster environments that encourage and sustain high-risk behaviors that can lead to crisis. Very honest. Over the last 8 years, multiple fraternities and sororities have experienced crisis. Some examples include the 2013 death of a first-year student while joining a fraternity at Brock College. Don't know if I'm saying that correctly. It landed 3 men in jail and barred the national fraternity from conducting business in the state of Pennsylvania. In 2015, a video depicting members of a fraternity sing a chant that stated they would not allow to join their fraternity went viral and caused the national fraternity to close the chapter. In 2017, alcohol-related deaths of pledges at Pennsylvania State University, Louisiana State University, Florida State University, and Texas State University caused system-wide shutdowns of fraternity and sorority life programs. In 2018, a first-year student at Ohio University died while participating in a fraternity hazing ritual, and this led to 9 individuals charged with felony crimes. In 2019, the death of a football player who attempted to join a fraternity at Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech, caused the fraternity's national body to implement a moratorium on new member educational programs for all chapters. In 2020, a sorority member at the University of South Carolina made a racist post on her Snapchat account on Martin Luther King Jr. Day that read "Happy," and caused the local chapter and the national sorority to take immediate action, including termination of the women's sorority membership. And with that being said, I'm not going to say that word. I find it very sad that that member felt it was safe to say that word. Even though it was in a joking matter, it's not a joke. but felt safe enough and knew it would get a good laugh or much support from her sorority in doing that. And I do find a lot of Caucasians still upset that they can't say that word, even though it is used in a song or they're using it in any other form, that they should be able to, because that's their right, which I find very disturbing. If you don't understand why, you need to get out of your bubble and start reading some books outside of your norm, doing something out of your norm. The incidents outlined above fit the definition of a crisis. The events were unpredictable, posed threats to, I don't think about unpredictable, those very predictable, posed threats to the regular operations of each organization and led to adverse effects on stakeholders by generating negative outcomes. The fraternities and sororities involved did not anticipate the events. False. And once they occurred, the organizations took actions to mitigate damaging consequences. At the time of this writing, scholarships on crisis communication and crisis management in fraternities and sororities was limited. Establishing a body of knowledge on crisis communication and crisis management in fraternities and sororities is significant due to the number of campuses that host fraternities and sororities and the many stakeholders impacted by each organization. So this is definitely a way of him being clever and finding a way to make more money within their organization, their industry, of how to combat this. Instead of just changing behaviors and the culture of it, let's create a Band-Aid, in my opinion. Thus, the study sought to establish a body of literature in the area of crisis communication and crisis management among fraternities and sororities. The study was a qualitative collective case study that gathered data using qualitative content analysis and semi-structured interviews, which this very much falls into place of what is going on within the University of Idaho in regards to the two sorority members of Dylan and Bethany and how they did not call 911. They called other people over because, as I mentioned, that is part of their playbook. It's part of their crisis management. And the university damn well knows that that's what that is, because Scott Green was an Alpha Kappa, I believe, so he knows, which is why he probably wrote that book. It's the industry. Statement of problem. Despite the multiple examples of crisis experienced by fraternities and sororities, scholarship analyzing crisis communication and crisis management among college-based Greek letter organizations is limited. The study examined crises that unfolded primarily online due to collegiate members of fraternities and sororities sharing content via SNS that depicted them engaged in racist, culturally insensitive acts. The existence of SNS such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat create opportunities for stakeholders to engage on topics and, depending on the dominant viewpoints, increase positive support or negatively escalate a situation. The virtual nature of SNS allow information to reach multiple stakeholder groups in a short amount of time. This can be problematic when the content shared poses negative consequences to an organization's operations. So this is damage control. This is mitigating it to decrease any type of pushback, which we watched in this case of Idaho 4, where we just watched part of the interview, which was, I want to say it was towards the end of the interview. I'll put the link in the description. This is also where she talks about 2 a.m. as a dark hour, which has been spoken about even way before this point on this channel. And also the amount of times that, you know, Sigma Chi has been on Good Morning America afterwards as part of the healing process, and how Maisie became the sweetheart and how they came on for interviews. That is PR. That is crisis management. That is not, that's the underlying cause of what they're doing. Yes, I'm sure a lot of them are hurt and sad of what happened, but it could have been prevented. that was an escalation of some sort. That just not happens just overnight. And like Thompson said, and the other officer said, it was an targeted attack. It was done by people who they knew. It was not a random act of violence. So it could have been prevented. Bystanders. Multiple searches across various academic databases did not yield scholarship focused on crisis communication in fraternities and sororities. Results from the searches focused on risk management issues, including hazing, alcohol consumption, and sexual assault, social responsibility, and personal and leadership development. The literature specific to communication in fraternities and sororities concentrated on the uses and effects of SNS, such as Twitter and Instagram. And here he's using several resources. He has 1, 2, 3, 4. The one before, 1, 2, 3. So he has several resources to hone in on his thesis to back him up. Research in crisis communication among fraternities and sororities is a timely and needed area of scholarship. Preparing the national and international organizations to anticipate, adequately prepare, and effectively manage crisis situations is necessary. A crisis experienced by a fraternity or sorority can potentially affect more than just the organization and its members. The actions of collegiate chapters can impact the families of the members and potential new members, the host institutions, and corporate, community, and business partners. Consequences can range from loss of life, emotional hurt, reputation damage, and monetary loss. So yes, that sounds all wonderful and beautiful, but let's work within the culture of as well. Purpose of study. The purpose of the study was to explore crisis communication and crisis management processes employed by fraternities and sororities. The study examined how content disseminated via SNS by collegiate members of fraternities and sororities contributed to the crisis experienced by the organization. SNS accessibility and reach transform these platforms into spaces that can facilitate solutions or exacerbate a crisis. Yes. This research analyzed the use of SNS by fraternities and sororities to manage and communicate during crisis. The study examined the use of image repair strategies in the organization's post-crisis response and compared them to stakeholder engagement with the shared content. Theoretical context. The study was guided by 3 primary concepts. First, the theory of media ecology. Second, situational crisis communication theory developed by Combs. And third, Benoit, image restoration theory. The theories are briefly explored in this section and explained with greater detail in Chapter 2. Media ecology. Media ecology is a theoretical framework that examines the impact of media, technology, and communication on human environments. The theory postulates that communication technology creates environments that influence human thought processes, attitudes, and behaviors, facilitates social change, and gives rise to human culture. A seminal study by Innes on time-biased media and space-biased media applies to fraternities and sororities. Time-biased media are sources designed to communicate information for longer periods of time but have limited reach. Examples of time-biased media in fraternities and sororities are ritual books, policies, and procedure manuals that provide proper instructions on organizational operations to members. While these documents contain relevant information to assist with organizational management, a limited number of members access the content. On the other hand, a space-biased media are sources that reach a wide audience but produce messages that are ephemeral and last for short periods of time. Some examples of space-biased media that apply to fraternities and sororities include posts on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. This content is accessed more frequently by a wider base of members, but the information disseminated through these channels is limited and sometimes inaccurate. McLuhan's work offers another dimension that could help fraternities and sororities develop strategies to utilize social network sites as tools to communicate with members during and after crisis. McLuhan proposed that the medium itself, not its content, is more important and should be the focus of study. He argued that mediums' characteristics have lasting effects on a group as opposed to content shared through the channel. He described some media as hot because they require little processing by the mind and encourage or enhance one single sense. An example of hot media are memes. In contrast, cool media requires more thought on the part of the viewer to understand. The study examined the influence of hot and cool media in a fraternities or sororities crisis communication and crisis management efforts. So this is a good thesis to look into of how this current case, Idaho 4, with the communications within Bethany and Dylan and the other members before 911 was called. Situational crisis communication theory. Organizational responses included during a crisis were examined using Combs' Situational Crisis Communication Theory, SCCT, is a framework that recommends crisis managers develop their crisis responses based on the level of crisis responsibility and the potential reputational damage on their organization may sustain. This theory is concerned with the public's perception and approval of an organization post-crisis. SCCT provides a structure for organizations to pair appropriate responses to a crisis. So think back to the beginning of how Sigma Chi handled this crisis, as well as the sororities of Alpha Phi and Pi Phi. Image restoration theory. Benoit Image Restoration Theory, IRT, presents strategies for individuals or organizations to restore their image after sustaining damage. The theory is grounded in two fundamental assumptions. First, communication is a goal-directed activity. Second, maintaining a favorable reputation is a key goal of communication. IRT is influenced by factors such as how much responsibility does the organization or individual bear in the crisis, the type of crisis taking place, and the organization's or individual's reputation. Let's read that again. IRT is influenced by factors such as how much responsibility does the organization or individual bear in the crisis, the type of crisis taking place, and the organization's or individual's reputation. So that's what their key goal of communication is. Maintaining a favorable reputation is key goal of communication. First, communication is a goal-directed activity, and second, maintaining it. Research questions. This study was guided by the overarching research question: how do social network sites influence crisis communication and crisis management among fraternities and sororities? The question explored the relationship between SNS and fraternities and sororities approaches to manage and respond to crises that unfold primarily online because of collegiate members of fraternities and sororities disseminating content via SNS that depicted them engaged in racist, culturally insensitive, acts. Specifically, the research focused on how SNS contributed to the development of crisis in fraternities and sororities, as well as how fraternal organizations use SNS to manage and respond to crisis. The topic is further explored by answering the following research questions. 1. What role does the use of social network sites play in creating crisis in fraternities and sororities? 2, how do fraternities and sororities use social network sites to engage with stakeholders during a crisis? So do you think at 1122 Queen Road that fraternities and sororities were using SNS to engage with the stakeholders during that crisis? You damn well right they were. Number 3, as well as in the other video I showed, fraternities and sororities, how they had purposefully called their main source to say, what do we do? And they said, hide all your letters, hide anything that shows our letters before you call 911. How do fraternities and sororities use social network sites to engage with stakeholders post-crisis? And how do fraternities and sororities adjust their operations post-crisis? Overview of research design. The study was a qualitative case study and included as its methodologies qualitative content analysis and semi-structured interviews. Eisenhart notes case studies are best suited for emerging research areas or research areas that are insufficiently addressed by existing theory and useful in early stages of research on a topic or when a fresh perspective is needed. Very good. This study explored an area within communication where scholarship is very limited. Therefore, it is imperative to understand crisis communication and crisis management strategies used by fraternities and sororities within the content they occurred. Very well done, very well used, but applying it in this manner, it makes my stomach turn a little bit. For this reason, the case study was selected. The case study is an exploration of bounded systems that occurred over time using detailed and in-depth data collecting involving multiple sources of information with a case description and themes to understand the phenomenon within its naturally occurring context. The case study format supports the aims of this research. First, case studies are suitable for investigating situations taking place in a contemporary context. Second, because the event is examined within its context, case studies generate insight into how the phenomenon occurred. And third, case studies help answer questions of why and how with a relatively full understanding of the nature and complexity of the complete phenomenon. I really don't see this as a phenomenon. This is just not combating the underlying cause of why they keep occurring and reoccurring and escalating. To summarize, these 3 factors made the case study an appropriate methodology for this research. First, case studies facilitate more comprehensive investigations of contemporary events for which the researcher has little control over. Second, case studies are suitable to answer how and why questions. And third, case study research examines data from multiple sources, including documents, artifacts, and interviews. I mean, this is very well done. I have to give it that. A qualitative context analysis provides a system of classification for data and a study using the research questions to process information. There are 4 advantages to the use of qualitative content analysis. 1, it provides clearly outlined steps to analyze any form of material or research question. 2, it provides the researcher flexibility to design a coding framework that is customizable to the specific data collected through the study. 3, it facilitates the analysis of data relevant to the study's research questions. And 4, it helps with the triangulation of data through the examination of multiple data sources. I still have some of my cold. I finally broke a few days ago. A qualitative content analysis can be conducted using one of 3 approaches: conventional, directed, and summative. The nature of this study is best supported by a conventional content analysis. Their approach is explained further in Chapter 3. This study reviewed artifacts producing during crisis experienced by fraternities and sororities over the past 6 years in the context in which they transpired. This study examined space-biased media, such as news stories and personal posts on SNS. These visual artifacts are accessed more frequently by a broader audience, but the information published may contain inaccuracies. This review sought to understand the use of hot media requires little thought to understand, and cool media requires more thought to understand. And crisis communication and crisis management determine patterns and responses and key lessons to apply to future events. This study utilized semi-structured interviews with fraternity and sorority volunteer leadership at the regional, national, international level and/or headquarters staff involved in the cases study. Interviews provided the researcher opportunities to further investigate observations made from the data gathered. Semi-structured interviews gathered data through discussions guided by an interview guide. The use of an interview protocol gives semi-structured interviews a directed and informal quality that is helpful for situations where the researcher may not have multiple opportunities to interview a person. Interviews were conducted virtually, recorded, and transcribed. All right, so site selection and data collection. This research focused on crises that resulted from collegiate members of fraternities and sororities engaging in racist, culturally insensitive acts and displayed through SNS. The study analyzed 4 individual cases, 2 fraternities and 2 sororities. Okay, so here we go. Here we go to your heads are going to start hurting a little. Because all of this is very well thought out, very well organized, very well done. And then it starts. As I said, the roller coaster. To accomplish this goal, cases studied included the use of at least 2 types of SNS to disseminate material connected to the case. The artifacts were examined to determine the source of the information, the source's proximity to the situation, the distribution of the information, and responses to information provided. The researchers studied the use of SNS to facilitate communication with stakeholders and how these platforms contributed to the development and the resolution of each crisis. As stated earlier, SNS present opportunities for stakeholders to engage in discussions about specific topics that can positively or negatively impact situations experienced by the organizations. The study considered crises experienced by national or international fraternities and sororities that are headquartered in the U.S. In the case of international fraternities and sororities, the researcher examined crises that occurred within one of the 50 states or the District of Columbia, since international laws could pose inconsistencies outside the scope of this study. A search using keywords such as fraternity, sorority, and racist was conducted using the search engine Google. A list of cases was compiled for review, and those that met all requirements of the selection criteria were included. The researcher was intentional about selecting cases that took place in various parts of the country. He was concerned that selecting cases that took place in the same geographical area of the country would construct false narratives about the organization in those areas. Virtual semi-structured interviews were conducted with fraternity and sorority volunteer leaders and/or headquarters staff. The researcher gained access to participants through the use of professional networks, which included members of the Association of Fraternal Sorority Advisors, AFA, National Association of Student Personal Administrators, NASPA, Fraternity Sorority Knowledge Community, and the Fraternal Communications Association. He utilized personal connections with colleagues to gain referrals to other professionals. Formal email invitations were sent to participants, and appropriate informed consent protocols were followed. Rationale and significance. 2 goals formed the rationale for this study. The first was a need to understand how SNS influenced crisis among fraternities and sororities, including creating crisis, communication and management during the events, and post-crisis recovery. Second, this study examined how image repair was used by fraternities and sororities to mitigate the effects of crisis. The This research is of interest primarily to fraternity and sorority professionals and college administrators. These stakeholders interact with collegiate members of local chapters across campuses regularly. Fraternity and sorority professionals who work or volunteer for the national and international organizations develop policies and procedures for their respective local chapters to follow. College administrators create policies for local chapters at the institutional level. The findings from the study will assist in the development of curricula for fraternities and sororities to train and prepare headquarters, staff, volunteers, members through regularly scheduled review activities such as tabletop exercises and instructional materials that prepare members to navigate organizational crisis. The impact of this research on the academic community is threefold. First, this research established an initial body of literature examining crisis communication and crisis management among fraternities and sororities, an area of scholarship that is limited. Second, this research sought to understand current crisis management and crisis communication practices among fraternities and sororities, consequently provided opportunities to rethink crisis communication and crisis management education in the fraternity and sorority industry. And third, findings from the study continue to grow the scholarship of crisis communication and social network sites. Specifically, results may lead to the development of a model for crisis communication that could enhance the operation of fraternities and sororities at the international, national, and local levels. The researcher's role. The researcher conducting this study is a doctoral candidate in a communications PhD program at a mid-sized public university in Pennsylvania. The researcher has been an active member of an international fraternity who, at the time of the study, had more than 22 years of leadership experience at the local, regional, and international levels of his organization. He currently serves as a full-time headquarters staff person for his fraternity. He previously worked at the headquarters for a national sorority and has volunteered for national and international fraternities and sororities in various capacities, including as a risk management education facilitator. When I hear risk management, I always think of that movie, Along Came Polly. Risk research analysis investigator or something like that. Prior to transitioning to work as a headquarters staff person, the researcher spent 19 years working in different roles within higher education, with the last 6 working in fraternity and sorority life at various campuses. The researcher has witnessed crisis unfold in the fraternity and sorority industry and has connections to stakeholders involved in many of those situations. Researcher's assumptions. Based on the researcher's professional experiences and involvement in the fraternity and sorority industry, there are 2 key assumptions related to this study. First, fraternities and sororities focus their crisis management efforts on strategies designed to protect or to prepare their image among their stakeholders. Second, media ecology is applicable to crisis development among fraternities and sororities, specifically the notion that communication technology influence human environments. Content posted by collegiate members through SNS influence human thought processes, attitudes, and behaviors, which may create situations that increase an organization's exposure to risk. If fraternities and sororities are invested in protecting their image among stakeholders, they should make efforts to understand the influence of SNS on their collegiate culture and individual members' behavior. All right, here we go. Definitions and terminology. The following terms and definition are provided to contextualize the scope of the study and thus provide a framework through which a reader can better understand the research. And congratulations to those who have the stamina to be here at this moment, as well as the other video, where some of you have watched the whole thing through and then you watched it again. And to have that patience and to understand that you have to hear it all shows how patience is a virtue and how you can really understand. If you want to talk about a totality, that is the totality. This is a totality. This channel, I like to believe, is understanding the totality of this case by breaking down all these little nuances that are within the industry of the Greek as well as the college. So congratulations to you. So actor is a person or organization who does something. So this is their terminology. Apology. A statement where the actor symbolically divides the self into two parts. The good self and the bad self. The bad self acknowledges the bad action, while the good self condemns the behavior. Let me read that again. The apology, a statement where the actor symbolically divides the self into two parts, the good self and the bad self. The bad self acknowledges the bad action, while the good self condemns the behavior. A complete apology has 5 parts. 1, expression of regret. 2, acknowledgement of expected behavior and sympathy for the approach. 3, repudiation of the behavior and the self committing it. 4, promise to behave correctly in the future. And 5, an anointment and compensation. I guess like atonement. There you go. Atonement and compensation. Okay. This is what you do when you apologize. You have 5 parts. Expression of regret, acknowledgement of expected behavior and sympathy for the approach, repudiation of the behavior and the self-committing it, promise to behave correctly in the future, and atonement and compensation. So here we go, blackface. A comedic performance style started in the 1830s by white people based on exaggerated notions of blackness that distorted the features and culture of African Americans and helped codify whiteness across class and geopolitical lines as the antithesis to these stereotypes. Bolstering. A strategy used to counterbalance audiences' disapproval of an organization's actions by associating the organization with positive concepts. And just to go by here with blackface, not all black people in America are from Africa. There are other parts of black people in America that do not get acknowledged. You have Caribbeans, you have Jamaicans, you have Haitians, so on and so forth. They're not all African. Just putting that out there. Chapter. The local branch of a fraternity or sorority that is duly constituted and authorized to carry out the organization's mission, vision, and values on the campus and in its city. Crisis, a situation that is unpredictable, poses a threat to the regular operations of an organization, and leads to adverse effects on stakeholders by generating negative outcomes. Culturally insensitive acts, behaviors that are insensitive, offensive, demeaning, derogatory, disrespectful, or irreverent expressions about any culture, tradition, but that do not amount to the advocacy of hatred based on a race or ethnicity or constitute incitement to cause harm. So, but that do not amount to the advocacy of hatred based on race or ethnicity or constitute incitement to cause harm. So, behaviors that are insensitive, offensive, demeaning, derogatory, disrespectful, or irreverent expressions about any cultural tradition, but that do not amount to the advocacy or hatred based on race or ethnicity or constitute incitement to cause harm. I don't agree with that whatsoever, because it does advocate to incite, to cause harm. That's what it does. It does that. I don't agree with that whatsoever. Emoji. A small digital image or symbol used in electronic communication to convey an idea or feeling. Facebook. A free SNS where individuals can post comments, share photographs, and post links to news or other web-based content, chat live, and watch videos. Shared content can be made publicly accessible, or it can be shared only among a select group of friends or family or with a single person. Fraternity. A society of men with an ascribed set of rituals. While fraternities are typically comprised of men, some are co-ed and grant membership to women. There are women's organizations that refer to themselves as fraternities. Some men's fraternities may include transgender individuals in their membership. For the purposes of the study, the researcher will use the term to describe college-based men's, social fraternities. GroupMe, a free SNS where individuals can send group or private messages from their computers or phones, create calendar events, and invite the other users directly in the app. Create polls or send photographs and videos. Individuals create a profile that is verified using their phone number via a text message. IFC, the Interfraternity Council, is the umbrella organization that typically coordinates the activities of collegiate chapters of the historically white fraternities and sororities. IFC's purpose is to advance the fraternity experience at the campus level and provide interfraternal leadership to the entire community. Image restoration theory, a framework based on the assumptions that communication is a goal-directed activity and maintaining positive reputation is a central goal of communication. The theory offers a typology of image restoration strategies. Instagram, a free SNS where individuals or businesses can upload, edit, and share photographs and short video through a mobile app. Users have the options of adding a caption to each post and use hashtags and location-based geotags to index content and make posts searchable. Users create public or private profiles accessible only to their followers. Membership view or review, evaluation of the current members of a chapter with behavioral problems. This process is typically conducted via interviews conducted by representatives from a fraternity or sorority to determine appropriate actions to take with the chapter members. Actions include keep, suspend, or terminate memberships. Meme, typically a photo or video that is established with text, usually sharing pointed commentary or cultural symbols, social ideas, or current events, and virally transmitted through SNS. NAPA, the National Asian Pacific Islander Desi American Panhellenic Association, is an umbrella organization that brings together 20 national, international fraternities and sororities that support APIDA, identify individuals to advocate, collaborate, and educate their members and communities. And NPC is a National Panhellenic Conference, is an umbrella organization over 26 national, international, historically white Greek letter sororities, which is at the University of Idaho if you look on their website. Sharing of information, resources, and best practices to advance the sorority experience for the member organizations. Publics, individuals or groups an organization would not consider as legitimate stakeholders and have mobilized themselves in response to an issue faced by the organization against the organization. So that is us on this channel. We are the publics. Racist acts, behaviors that are prejudiced against or antagonistic toward individuals or a group of people on the basis of their membership in a particular minoritized or marginalized racial or ethnic group. Retweet a tweet forwarded by a Twitter user to their followers. Screenshot an image that shows the contents of a computer or mobile device displayed to share with others or reference later, sometimes referred to as a screen cap or screen grab, which we know of that Dylan had done. Yes. I want to say she had screenshots and Bethany was taking pictures. Snap a photograph or video sent to or received by Snapchat users. Snapchat, a free SNS where individuals can connect privately with other users and share photographs and short videos, engage in live video chatting, messaging, sharing chronological stories that are broadcast to the individual's followers, store media in a private storage area, and add filters and AR-based lens to snap and show live location on a world map. And social fraternity and sorority. A social or general fraternity or sorority is a society of men or women that do not promote a particular profession or discipline, but rather focus on the development of character, scholastic achievement, leadership ability, or a simpler social purpose. Which I have a hard time believing that, as I've learned more and more about these fraternities and sororities, that a lot of this has overshadowed this. A simpler social purpose? I don't know about all that. Social network sites, web-based communication platforms that allow individuals to build public or semi-public profiles within a bounded system, identify users with whom to share connections, connect emotionally, and form relationships within the system. Sorority, a society of women with an ascribed set of rituals. Some sororities may include transgendered individuals in their membership. For the purpose of this study, the researcher will use the term described college-based women's social sororities. Twitter, a free SNS where individuals communicate and stay connected through the exchange of quick, frequent messages that may contain photographs, videos, links, and texts. Messages are posted to a user's profile and sent to their followers, and also are searchable. Individuals can create public or private profiles. And a tweet, a message posted to Twitter that contains photographs, videos, links, and or text. Dissertation organization. The study is organized into 5 chapters. Chapter 1 provides an introductory overview of the research problem. 2 provides a review of relevant literature focused on crisis management and crisis communication, image repair, media ecology, and the use of SNS by organizations in crisis. 3 describes the research design. 4 presents findings of the study. And 5 analyzes the findings and presents a conclusion and recommendation for future studies. Chapter 2, Review and Related Literature, Purpose and Rationale. The purpose of this literature review is to provide a general overview of crisis communication, crisis management, and the use of social network sites during crisis. It also follows or allows for presentation of current research on crisis management and crisis communication among national and international college-based fraternities and sororities. The review began by defining crisis. Next, the review discussed corporate crisis communication and crisis management, followed by the uses of SNS during crises. The next section reviewed current research in crisis communication, management, and the SNS use in fraternities and sororities. The review closed with a discussion of the theoretical underpinning of the study, namely the theory of media ecology, situational crisis communication theory, and image restoration theory. So crisis defined. There are 4 dimensions of crisis that are valuable and must be described: crisis, crisis management, crisis communication, and crisis learning. Each element builds off the previous component. So crisis. A variety of definitions can be found for crisis. The purpose of this study: a crisis is defined as an unpredictable event that is perceived by the stakeholders as to pose a threat to the regular operations of an entity, has the potential to adversely affect stakeholders by generating negative outcomes that could impact the organization, the industry, its products, services, or reputation, and leaves the organization's leadership with limited time to respond to the issue, thus requiring decisive and immediate solutions. And I can understand them doing this because a lot of these sororities and the fraternities, for example, Sigma Chi has Huntsman Cancer Foundation. That's not going to look good for the Huntsman Cancer Foundation that this has happened under their watch. And Alpha Phi is under the Heart Association. And that is a major organization of charity. These charity type organizations, which if you know anything about charity organizations that are non-for-profit, sometimes are not the best, have the best light. They don't have the best reputation because they tend to be used as a way to funnel money, or it's used as a mask, which is unfortunate because sometimes those non-for-profits end up being way bigger than what it potentially was used for. And for Alpha Phi, let me double check here. Pi Phi. There is literacy, which, looking at the states and the prosecutor, the judge, the way they spell, may need to get into some remediation with that. And it sounds like I'm joking, but I'm not, because it's really sad. There's spell checks. There's Grammarly. And I understand working for the state sometimes, people think that they have a lot of money. They really don't. Like, their software is kind of old, and they have like the least amount of technological advances when it comes to that. But spell check is definitely on there through Microsoft. It usually has like a red squiggle line, and you hit it to show how to spell it correctly. That's all I got to do. Spell check. Basic. Based on the literature, this project used the following 6 questions to determine whether Did I read all that above? I just started going. Excuse me. Negative outcomes include any form of harm to stakeholders, mounting pressures from publics or media scrutiny. It is important to note that while the definition of crisis includes an element of unpredictability, Combs notes that unpredictability refers to when a crisis is expected to occur. Not the probability an organization will experience a crisis. Combs explains that the possibility of a crisis occurring should come as no surprise to any organization. So there you go. I'm glad that was finally said out loud. But with that being said, you can help mitigate some of your crisis by taking care of the underlying causes. Based on the literature, this project used the following 6 questions to determine whether a situation qualifies as a crisis and therefore analyzed as part of this study. Is the event unpredictable? Does the event threaten the operation of the organization? Does the event threaten the expectations of the stakeholders? And are there high consequences for those affected? How much time does leadership have to make decisions? And is the event preventable? Crisis management. Crisis management and crisis communication aim to mitigate unintended negative effects of events and organizational activities to protect the interest of stakeholders and ensure the organization complies with social, safety, and environmental standards. Crisis management is defined as a reactive response to a crisis to forestall or lessen the damage that the crisis can inflict on the organization and its stakeholders handle to the threats sequentially and consist of 3 phases: pre-crisis, crisis response, and post-crisis. Which, after reading this, I feel like this is how this case is going. The pre-crisis, crisis response, and this is what we're dealing with right now, the crisis response, and just that little aspect I read of that recent court document. And I didn't go over also how Dylan saw Xana just laying in her bed on the floor with her head towards the window and her feet towards the door. So the door was wide open and she didn't think anything of it. It was just, oh, Xana is drunk. Now, does she do that often? Like she just ends up just drunk on her floor like that? I have a hard time believing it, but I understand it happens once in a while when you're in your college years, once in a while. But when it's a pattern like that, that's troubling. And the way that you saw the pictures, and a lot of people are meaning like this is very much drug related. But when I look at these pictures, these girls don't look tired and tattered, like they've been ridden hard and put away wet type of thing. And some of the people they are surrounded by do look that way. Like they have been partying a little hard and they have social media posts with them looking pretty rough, but not these four. And as a medical professional, I would see that. I've seen some of their friends, but not so much them. So I have a hard time believing that Xana's norm of just being drunk, laying on her floor in her bedroom like that with the door open. And that the fact that they were all just sitting quietly, just hanging around in Maddie's room, just shooting the shit for 10 minutes, for a while, for 10 minutes, and then thinking about going to the grub truck. You see how they just slid that in afterwards, after the public has been talking about Eric Gower? And why is she calling him 10 minutes later after they got home? Oh, because they wanted to go to the grub truck. Oh, okay. Even though Maddie and Kaylee just came from there, and they did just share it, but my first thought was, well, they were just sharing it because maybe Kaylee wasn't planning on eating a lot. You know, she has a petite stature, and with her, have you seen throughout her posts, she has been very health conscious of how she eats. Whereas Maddie, not all of us can be a Maddie and be tall and naturally thin, and she probably can eat everything and anything and doesn't even faze her. We all have girlfriends that are like Kaylee and Maddie. So I don't know about all that. And for them to put that out there in court documents is another instance of where I've been saying they are using public forum or reacting to the public and how they do their case. If you have to use the public's reaction in order to try your case, you're in trouble. And you know it. You know it. That's the thing, is you are aware of that. It's not, well, they don't know. Wait until trial. We got our evidence. No, they're doing it along the way. It's like the Karen Reed trial. She's speaking out in public, and now this is the second one, 2.0, and Honk Brennan is just using her words, is trying to use her words against her, because yes, that is the right of the state to do that, but that's all you got? That's all you got. It doesn't look good. You're shaming a victim. You're shaming victims when you do that, because they're a victim. They're innocent until proven guilty. The burden's on the state, and the state is using reactionary measures to help try their case. They're getting me hot. They're getting me hot. So pre-crisis, crisis response, and the post-crisis, in my opinion, is the trial. The pre-crisis phase focuses on prevention and preparation. The crisis response phase is a stage that requires a response from leadership, judges, prosecutors. And the post-crisis phase is dedicated to analyzing the crisis and identifying solutions to address the next crisis and follow through on commitments made during the crisis phase. In short, crisis management is a process that incorporates preventative measures, structured plans, and evaluations. The amount of time and energy that Green has been in this case, he's been there since the beginning. Not in a civil case, in a crime. Now, in the other videos, looking at the hazing, the deaths of those, you did see in some that the president spoke, trying to mitigate that. It happened in a few, not all of them, but we have not seen the amount of those as well, or as of with Scott Green. He has been very much hands-on, and he wrote the book. Crisis management and non-profit organizations, which I was just talking about. Fraternities and sororities are non-profit organizations, with some designated as 501c7 and others as 501c10. Their status as NPOs makes them unique entities when compared to other college-based organizations. NPOs operate in a shifting environment because they are dependent on their stakeholders and are typically held to a higher expectation than most for-profit organizations. For this reason, NPOs' public relation efforts must be able to control a situation and reassure publics during a crisis, which sounds a lot like Sigma Chi, the Huntsman Cancer Foundation, the Chapin's out speaking before the university has, the university speaking, them going to Good Morning America and being interviewed. Alpha Phi has not really said much in regards to Kaylee, but Pi Phi with Ashley Couch coming out, as well as Kaylin also coming out and speaking for the foundation to help raise money for their scholarships for the victims. It doesn't look good when you're asking for donations on the decedents to help, keep their name going for a good cause, which I understand that is done, but the way they do it, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't sit right with me, in my opinion. For this reason, NPO's public relations efforts must be able to control a situation and reassure publics during a crisis. NPOs must balance a range of publics, including volunteers, staff, supporters, the groups they serve, the media, and the public at large, which we all see this done with the Idaho 4. There are three key distinctions between non-profit, There are three key distinctions between nonprofit and for-profit organizations. NPOs do not coerce participation. NPOs operate without distributing profits to stakeholders, and NPOs do not have clear lines of ownership and accountability. Due to the higher expectations and reliance on public perception, betrayal of public trust is one of the biggest threats to an NPO. Therefore, maintaining a favorable image with its publics is pivotal to its key functions such as fundraising, political support, and membership growth. So there you go. They did a lot in order to maintain a favorable image, having Maisie be the sweetheart, showing how happy they are, Hunter and Maisie, and filming it and then putting on national television. The interviews with the members and how they felt and what they went through. Same thing with, I'll take that back. Alpha Phi did, yes. They went on one of the bigger stations, I want to say 48 Hours, something along the lines of that, or 2020, it was 2020, and how they spoke about Kaylee and the actions and how they found out. Right there is crisis management. It's unfortunate to say it like that or to see it like that, but here we are. Were they upset about the whole situation? Absolutely. But in my opinion, it could have been prevented. That was an escalation of some sorts, and many were involved. And many were involved of not doing anything to help prevent it from happening. I'm sure a lot of it saw it coming and didn't do a damn thing. Crisis communication. And this is why I did this channel for this, because of going to college, and I'm finally hitting that age group on this channel where I'm hoping that they see this and can learn of what they're getting themselves into, how what they're going through is natural, how they're going through is normal. It can be isolative, it can be scary, you can be gaslit. You're going to be surrounded by professionals who are acting like children, who are not being the adults, how it can be very confusing. So this was why I started this channel, and I'm starting to get to that age group, which if you're here, welcome, and I'm glad you're here. Crisis communication is defined as the collection, processing, and disseminating of information required to address, limit, and mitigate the effects of crisis, determined by the degree to which stakeholders and publics perceive that the organization is responsible for the crisis. The goal of the crisis communication is to create situational awareness, a state in which all the stakeholders involved have a uniform understanding of a particular situation. In other words, crisis communication should provide stakeholders context to help them comprehend the event in a similar manner. Combs notes the crisis communication process consists of 3 phases: pre-crisis, crisis response, and post-crisis. In the pre-crisis phase, communication is utilized to assess the potential for events to escalate into a crisis, determine strategies to address potential crisis, and train all stakeholders who will be involved in crisis management. During the crisis response phase, information is collected, processed, and shared with crisis management teams to aid in decision-making development and distribution of crisis communication to outside publics. The post-crisis phase includes the evaluation of crisis management plans, recommendations for adjustments to key stakeholders, and distribution of additional follow-up crisis messages. And I hate to go there, but what if Brian Koberger was their crisis management? What is this part of the crisis? The stakeholders that are involved, this was part of their crisis management. With the amount of FBI is there, were they part of the crisis management as well? Because they work in covert aspects, and in order to help that crisis management of the stakeholders, they went ahead and do their own covert operations, which we've spoken here before in regards to IgG, CAST, mostly IgG, Amazon clicks. It was twofold. Is it plausible? I think so, unfortunately. Do I want to go there? No. Do you want to think that? Absolutely not. But here we are. Here are we learning about how they conduct their crisis management for their stakeholders, because there's a lot of money involved within this industry. There are some considerations of organizations to make as they develop their crisis communication plans. Crisis communication should consider the culture of the environment occupied by the organization. Use language that aligns with the culture. Utilize strategies that foster strengths and minimize weaknesses to maximize external opportunities and counter external threats. Crisis learning. Moynihan describes crisis learning as the identification and application of practices and behaviors by an entity to improve future crisis response. The post-crisis phase is enhanced when crisis communications professionals extrapolate key lessons learned from an event and apply them to future crisis. He describes the high consequentially and minimal response time as factors that challenge learning from a crisis. Due to the pressure that organizations experience to restore a sense of normalcy during a crisis, Boyne et al. Caution against using overgeneralized experiences learned from a crisis as shortcuts to develop solutions for a current crisis. They recommend using lessons learned from past crises in combination with crisis experiences of other organizations. The ambiguity of the cause and effect relationship of a crisis creates situations where obvious warnings are misinterpreted, overlooked, or ignored, which may be attributed to organizations operating under a rigid set of values, ignoring or mishandling feedback from stakeholders, or minimizing the potential impact of the crisis. Right there. They recommend using lessons learned from past crises in combination with crisis experiences of other organizations. The ambiguity of the cause and effect relationship of a crisis creates situations where obvious warnings are misinterpreted, overlooked, or ignored, which may be attributed to organizations operating under a rigid set of values, ignoring or mishandling feedback from stakeholders, or minimizing the potential impact of the crisis. So, it's not our fault. It wasn't our fault because of X, Y, and Z. Moynihan describes barriers that may impede an organization's ability to learn from a crisis and include limited information processing, application of old solutions to new problems, organizational politics, defensive posturing that leads to deflecting responsibility, and denial of the existing problem or committing an error. Limited information processing can lead to defective inferences and drawing the wrong lessons from a crisis, and focusing on organizational instead of intra-organizational learning. So with those rigid, what do they say here, rigid, let's see here, under rigid set of values, which I like the sound of that because of that rigidness, this is why you keep having these problems. You wouldn't have racist shit going on because of your rigid set of values. So you bring it upon yourself. You keep bringing it upon yourself. The advantages and challenges presented by crisis learning are applicable to the nature of fraternities and sororities as NPOs. Non-profit organizations must balance many stakeholders to maintain the favorable disposition necessary to execute key organizational functions. The high consequentially nature of a crisis and the minimal response time afforded to fraternal leadership made crisis learning a relevant dimension to include in the study. Corporate crisis communication and crisis management. A corporation, by definition, is an organization or group of people authorized to act as a single entity, separate from its owners and recognized as such by law. Corporations can make a profit, are subject to taxation, and can be held legally liable. A corporation, by definition, is an organization or group of people authorized to act as a single entity, separate from its owners and recognized as such by law. Corporations can make a profit, are subject to taxation, and can be held legally liable. Fraternities and sororities with national and international structures are non-profit corporations, designated as 501c7 or 501c10 organizations. According to the IRS, 50c7 status is reserved for social clubs which 1, must be organized for exempt purposes, must provide an opportunity for personal contact among members, and memberships must be limited, and must be supported by membership fees, dues, and assessments. Net earnings may not inure to the benefit of any person having a personal and private interest in its activities. And 5, may receive de minimis income for non-traditional sources. And hello. And 6, governing instrument may not contain a provision that provides for discrimination against any person on the basis of race, color, or religion. A 50C10 status is reserved for a domestic fraternal society, order, or association that 1, has fraternal purpose based on a common ideal or the pursuit of a common object, 2, has a substantial program of fraternal activities, 3, operates under the lodge system with a minimum of 2 active entities, a parent organization and a subordinate organization like a chapter, chartered by the parent organization and mostly self-governing. 4, cannot pay benefits to its members. 5, must use its net earnings to fulfill its fraternal purposes. And 6, must be a domestic entity organized in the United States. Though each fraternal organization was founded by a core group of individuals, national and international fraternities are incorporated into a body that is no longer the sole property of the founders. They collect fees, maintain budgets, file taxes, and are subject to legal accountability based on the actions taken by their chapters. For example, some fraternities and sororities have sections on their national and international websites that outline fraternity dues and provide resources to help chapters plan their finances, which they do. I've looked through a lot of them, as well as documentation of policies and procedures to help chapters and members stay compliant with organizational policies and out of trouble. So you have Alpha Phi here, which is what Kaylee was a part of. Alpha Kappa is Scott Green. Pi Kappa, I want to say, is also there at the university. For this reason, corporate communication practices are applicable to the life cycle of fraternities and sororities and therefore explored in this section. Corporate communication. For the purpose of the study, corporate communication is defined as a management function that provides a framework to effectively and efficiently harmonize all consciously used forms of internal and external communication with key stakeholders for the overall purpose of establishing and maintaining favorable reputations with the stakeholder upon which the organization is dependent. Corneliuson described the evolution of corporate communication from public relations and a focus on external stakeholders to incorporate a whole range of specialized disciplines, including corporate design, corporate advertising, internal communication to employees, issues and crisis management, media relations, investor relations, change communication, and public affairs. He said the shift to encompass a wide range of disciplines is fitting for corporate communication because corporate originally stems from the Latin words body, corpus, and forming into a body, corpore, which emphasize a unified way of looking at internal and external communication disciplines. 5. This concept is supported by Christensen, who state that corporate communication builds on the assumption that management is able to bring disciplines and fields of practice together to act and speak in unison. Corporate communication is interdisciplinary and seeks to bring together the work done by communication practitioners in specialized areas such as media relations, public affairs, and internal communications, which Maddie was part of Pi Phi's PR and marketing. And Kaylee was in the executive board. Corporate communication focuses on the overall appearance of the whole organization to key internal and external stakeholders. This dimension of corporate communication is applicable to the fraternities and sororities examined in this study. The organizations are national, international entities with complex structures and are accountable to a range of internal and external of stakeholders. As the result, their communication efforts must be holistic, taking into account their presentation to all stakeholders. The organization's presentation is tied to its identity, and its identity affects the organization's reputation. Corporate identity. An organization's identity is developed by strategic communication to external stakeholders and patterns of meaning-making internal stakeholders used to create identification within the organization. Corporate identity is based on organizational images or the impressions of an organization that are held by people or conveyed by the organization to the public. These perceptions are influenced by 4 types of organizational images: projected images, perceived images, refracted images, and defining images. Projected images are produced by the organization. Perceived images are perceptions of the organization held by insiders or outsiders. Refracted images are those mediated by third parties, such as news media, and defining images are those that represent the core values of the organization. Corporate identity is the tangible representation of an organization's corporate personality, or the core values reflected in the organization's culture, mission, and vision. As a result, corporate identity constructs an image of the organization using its corporate personality or its deeper patterns of meaning and sense-making by people within the body, based on the core values that define the organization and differentiates the organization from similar entities in their eyes of important stakeholders, thus developing a corporate reputation. Differentiating using the organization's intelligible character is valuable because it makes it challenging for competing groups to replicate the organization's corporate identity. Corporate reputation. An organization's favorable presentation to stakeholders forms the basis for its corporate reputation. Stakeholders' perceptions of past interactions with an organization are the foundation for the organization's reputation. Scholarship in this area has defined corporate reputation as the collective, relational history of an organization's intentions, history, mission, and capacity to deliver valuable outcomes to a network of multiple audiences that shape stakeholders' expectations of the organization. The strength of the reputation is vested in the authenticity and distinctiveness of the values, corporate personality. The organization communicates I think he's missing a section here, but that can happen. A good corporate reputation secures acceptance and legitimacy from stakeholders and increases the likelihood of the organization will receive more positive post-crisis reviews, less angry responses from the publics, and less negative word of mouth reviews than an organization with a less favorable reputation. WOM is defined as informal communication generated by individuals and directed at other stakeholders about the qualities or characteristics of specific deliverables and or their providers. Along with authenticity and distinctiveness, the organization's industry, human resources, social responsibilities, finance, and customer satisfaction practices impact their corporate reputation. To add another layer of complexity, corporate reputation is a multidimensional construct that is issue-specific, where stakeholders can have multiple perceptions. The The relational nature of fraternities and sororities position them to seek acceptance and legitimacy from publics, and this approval is determined by the organization's actions and practices, as well as trends in the fraternal industry. For the purpose of this study, corporate reputation is defined as a relatively stable issue in a stakeholder group-specific aggregate perceptual representation of a company's past actions and future prospects compared against some standard by external stakeholders. That's a mouthful. Corporate crisis response. News media coverage during a crisis causes organizations to constantly reframe their responses, which I feel like we are seeing right now. An important first step in crisis response is openly communicating with stakeholders impacted by the crisis through direct meetings, news feeds, and SNS posts. During a crisis, communication professionals should focus their initial efforts on providing updates to media channels and addressing the physical and psychological concerns of stakeholders directly affected by the crisis. Did we watch literally? Now, we are all had to go back and look and see how much of this crisis is done by stakeholders and their association with these fraternities and sororities. I mean, there was so much FBI, former FBI interviews of this case. Granted, there was 4 people, which is huge. But the amount of crisis management that went on, not just with the families, not with just the university, but the amount of media coverage. Some of it, in my opinion, was just definitely the state, the prosecution, jumping ahead and kind of starting the narrative. You can definitely see that with, he's an incel, and yada, yada, yada. And a lot of the students were not even buying that information in the beginning. They were not buying the information that the press conferences were saying. And I'm sure a lot of the students they spoke to were not part of any organization like a fraternity or sorority. So they're the ones are literally like the outsiders looking in and seeing how their university is like being ran in front of their eyes without them being a part of the focus at all, in my opinion. The second step is to determine the organization's responsibility for the crisis and communicate findings to key stakeholders. Crises are categorized into 2 types according to scope of damage: self-threatening crisis and society-threatening crisis. Self-threatening crises are offenses that have a direct negative impact on stakeholders' interests, product, consumption, our daily lives. The term society-threatening crisis refers to misbehaviors that damage organizations or society as a whole, but do not directly harm individual people. Stakeholders' perceptions of how close a crisis is to them depends on the relationship of crisis type to locus of damage. Some may view the impact of a crisis as close to them, while others may see it distant. This phenomenon is best understood by constructual level theory, CLT. CLT asserts that an individual's psychological distance toward an object, or the subjective experience that something is close or far away from the self here and now, influences the person's interpretation of the object. This conceptualization creates a psychological distance, shapes a person's evaluation of an object, and leads to behaviors. Which I'm saying, just with us and those who are committed to this case, to seeing it through, trying to understand what is going on, seeing how it's being handled. Many of us are far away from Idaho, or not even close to Idaho, and many people are out of the country who are watching this. But for some reason and somehow, many people relate to this case because of being an outsider, understanding how many of us have been targeted in one way or another, have been pushed around one way or another. have understood of being in situations where they were out of our control because of a group or a business, which I consider this, fraternity and sororities, kind of have control of your life that you want nothing to do with, but somehow it's part of your life and it affects you when you don't want it to, as well as seeing someone who is not even connected to the case is somehow responsible for this case, and he's an outsider. And then all the while watching how they're conducting the evidence throughout and seeing how our rights are being affected in a covert fashion in order to hide how they're completing these types of interventions that are very complicated, very scientific, and that can be mishandled and misused. So it's a complex case, meaning there are a lot of layers to it that people are reading between the lines, not just doing that, but also seeing for what it is. And I find that a phenomenon. I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments about that. Reputation management. An organization's reputation is shaped by its corporate identity, including prior experiences, which in turn form stakeholders' perceptions of the organization. While an organization's collective history and past deeds builds its reputation, the organization's words and actions in the aftermath of a crisis are essential to perceiving that reputation or preserving that reputation. As a result, managing an organization's reputation involves an active collaboration between key communicators to strategically plan and design messaging that will influence public perceptions of corporate identity by internal and, more importantly, external stakeholders. So this whole case has been, after this, been damage control from within and from on the outside. Fostering an internal culture of ethical responsibility is a key component of effective communication and is especially important to effectively and ethically prevent issues and resolve crises. Okay. An organization with a visible, authentic corporate culture can build better relationships with external publics, negate the negative impact of a crisis, and protect its reputation. Ultimately, no matter the details of a situation, reputations are based largely on perceptions, and these are shaped by media, activists, special interest groups, and community leaders. And you do see them throughout their pages on Insta, how they are part of like the community cupboard. The literacy, the heart disease, that's like their huge corporate entity. They're non-for-profit, but they do get involved with the community. With the community cupboard is one, and I'll look through them and also post them on here when I go and edit and add visuals. Unfavorable perceptions held by key stakeholders threaten an organization's reputation. 3 factors influence reputational threat: initial crisis responsibility, crisis history, and poor relational reputation. Initial crisis responsibility refers to how much stakeholders believe the organization's actions caused the crisis. Okay? Taking some accountability here. Crisis history is concerned with any similar crisis experienced by the organization in the past. Prior relational reputation describes stakeholders' perceptions of past treatment received from the organization. An organization's reputation determines an appropriate and effective response to a given situation, especially in instances where the organization attempts to repair its reputation. Strategies to protect reputation. This is like hurting my head. It's all about the reputation. If you work on your internal shit and your rigid rigid rituals and your rigid ways of doing things, you're going to have some positive changes. There's going to be some negative impact because people don't like changes. That's traditional. A lot of people hang on to traditions, which I understand. I do find some of them are important, while others are, in my opinion, not that important. They end up being on the petty aspect, in my opinion. Just with like looks and acts and so on and so forth. But if you take care of your internal ways of doing things, you won't have to work so hard on protecting your reputation, because your reputation will speak for itself. I mean, that's not that hard to figure out. Combs notes that crisis response strategies are determined by the extent to which the public attributes the cause of the crisis to the organization. Crisis responsibility is determined by crisis type and the severity of the damage. Combs developed the following strategies to repair an organization's reputation. Primary crisis response strategy. Deny crisis response strategies. Attack the accuser. Crisis manager confronts the person or group claiming something is wrong with the organization. Oh boy, let me go back. Strategies to protect reputation. Combs notes that crisis response strategies are determined by the extent to which the public attributes the cause of the crisis to the organization. Crisis responsibility is determined by crisis type and the severity of the damage. Combs developed the following strategies to repair. This is what they do to repair an organization's reputation. And we're going to see this happening as I read these. Primary crisis response strategies. Deny crisis response strategy. Attack the accuser. Crisis manager confronts the person or group claiming something is wrong with the organization. We see that happening when you question the case. Denial. Crisis manager asserts that there is no crisis. Scapegoat. Crisis manager blames some person or group outside of the organization for the crisis. Incels. Vegans. Too smart. Diminish crisis response strategies. Excuse. Crisis manager minimizes organizational responsibility by denying intent to do harm and or claiming an inability to control the events that triggered the crisis. Justification. Crisis manager minimizes the perceived damage caused by the crisis. Rebuild crisis response strategy. I mean, and some of us on this YouTube community of following this case and presenting this case have definitely felt that some YouTube people have definitely worked for either undercover in some way, shape, or form, or who are constantly on people's channels making comments to diminish what they are saying on their platform or deny what they're saying is true on their platform or attack the person on their platform or people within those comments. We see all this happening. Rebuild crisis response strategy. Compensation. Crisis manager offers money or other gifts to victims. Yikes. Apology. Crisis manager indicates the organization takes full responsibility for the crisis and asks stakeholders for forgiveness. We didn't see anything like that. Secondary crisis response strategy. Bolstering crisis response strategies. Reminder. Tell stakeholders about the past good works for the organization. Integration. Crisis manager praises stakeholders and or reminds them of past good works by the organization. And victimage. Crisis managers remind stakeholders that the organization is a victim of the crisis too, which now the organizations are victims when we don't actually give actual victims any type of leniency or understanding, especially when it comes within our justice system. Victim shame, victim blame. And yes, there are people who have used that in a way to try to gain something, but you know who else does that? Organizations, the justice system. They do it too. So you can't just point your finger to one when many others are doing it as well. And yes, I do get very upset for those who, for some reason, say it never happened. I always question those though, at some point, because the way victims are treated in our society when it comes to sexual assault or domestic violence, they are constantly picked at and picked at and picked at and picked at, and you have to continually go into court and replay and retell over and over and over and over again, to the point where they say, I give up, and never happened. And that's a strategy on the state's end and the justice end. So you always have to think or look at every individual case that does do that, because every time they want it to end, they're the ones that are the victim, and they're being re-victimized over and over again. Why the ones who actually committed those acts are not even, there's no skin off their teeth at all. The only reason why they have an issue with it, because they don't like to be exposed as, well, you did it. I hope you know what I'm talking about and understand. Without having given you specifics, I mean, we've all been here long enough to know what I'm talking about and hear and see what I'm talking about. I guess a most recent one was that poor lady, that poor woman in France with her husband, what he did to her. He drugged her every night. I mean, come on. Social network sites and crisis communication. Social network sites. As noted in Chapter 1, the study defines SNS as highly accessible web-based platforms that allow individuals to create public or semi-public profiles with varying degrees of public access to connect with other individuals that share commonalities, create and disseminate content, and facilitate interactive dialogue. The term social network sites is used interchangeably with the term social networking sites. The term social networking sites implies intentions to connect with new people, and this is not often the goal of individuals engaged in SNS. This study uses the term social network sites because users typically engage with other users who are already part of their extended network, as opposed to building a new network. These applications are commonly called social media, and the term is used interchangeably with social network sites. For the purpose of the study, the applications are referred to as social network sites. As stated in Chapter 1, the study examined the impact of SNS on crisis management and crisis communication in college-based fraternities and sororities. The study examined the influence of SNS in the formation of crisis experienced by fraternities and sororities that unfolded primarily online because of collegiate members of fraternities and sororities disseminating content via SNS that depicted them engaged in racist, culturally insensitive acts. The study analyzed the use of SNS by fraternities and sororities to manage and communicate with stakeholders during the crisis. During the course of the next 6 years, fraternities and sororities experienced crisis that originated from content posted by collegiate members through various SNS that depicted undergraduate members engaged in racist, culturally insensitive acts. These incidences disrupted the organization's operations and required quick action on the part of the organizational leadership to address the behaviors. For this reason, SNS roles during crisis experienced fraternities and sororities were studied as part of this research. As nonprofit entities, fraternities and sororities would benefit from modeling their use of SNS after other nonprofit organizations. The recommendation is based on the opportunities SNS offered nonprofit organizations to communicate their value to stakeholders through persuasive messages. A feature... Oh, I just lost my spot. A feature that supports the interests of fraternities and sororities. SNS provide multiple channels for members to connect to the network to those of like-minded individuals and serve as educational tools. Thus, SNS offer communication professionals options to share a variety of content beyond the platform's capacities to promote an organization's vision, mission, and values. The impact of SNS on interpersonal communication among publics and opportunities they present for stakeholders to directly access and share feedback with organizations make these applications an integral form of communication in our society for the long run. Social networked sites during crisis. The widespread use of SNS allows organizations to share information with stakeholders, build community by allowing individuals to expand their networks and encourage followers to mobilize and take action on a particular cause. Okay. SNS facilitated intimate relationship building with stakeholders more effectively than traditional media and increases trustworthiness among individuals. Additionally, SNS can facilitate two-directional interactive exchanges of information, allowing publics to provide timely feedback. Receiving immediate feedback is a valuable asset for nonprofit organizations, particularly during a crisis when SNS may be more effective communication tools. However, SNS also pose challenges to nonprofit organizations in difficult times. During a crisis, an organization must find ways to adjust its narrative to make sense of the unusually challenging situation. The need to change its story may stem from difficulties shifting cultural and structural practices during the unanticipated challenges as a result of the identity formed from the collective experiences of group members and the social constructs they enact within the organization. Modern communication and informational technology have increased individuals' access to knowledge, including in organizations or industries' problems and concerns, and this accessibility continuously poses challenges for many organizations. This is particularly important during a crisis. While in the midst of a crisis, individuals find themselves in a state of chaos, and as the situation unfolds, they turn to mediated sources for information. SNS provides spaces for two-directional interactive information exchanges. SNS supplements traditional media by quickly providing individuals access to updated information and opportunities to collaborate on improving the quality of content in the process of creating situational awareness, a condition in which stakeholders comprehend information in the same way. Which, as I'm thinking about this, as I'm reading, I wonder if Bethany and Dylan had any type of that communication through their organization. They both were part of Pi Phi, and the people that came over to help them were also Pi Phis. I mentioned about Bethany taking pictures. Maybe that was part of her just helping herself with her family. That could also come from the chapter itself. Or what if, for Dylan, they were saying that she was getting rid of videos and pictures. Was that part from the chapter after they spoke with their stakeholders on the event that happened? And that's why it took 8 hours for them to do anything, because they had to do their situational crisis management. It really makes you think now after reading this and how this case has been handled. Perhaps this phenomenon is best understood through media dependency theory. which posits that audiences depend on mediated information to meet particular goals, and in the process, they maintain preferences for specific sources they will turn to for information or specific subjects. MDT applies to crisis management and crisis communication because dependency is greater when audiences are highly invested in the available information or find themselves in ambiguous scenarios. During uncertain times, individuals use SNS as coping methods to restore a stabilized psychological state and purge negative feelings. Additionally, effective and timely communication during a crisis over an organization's SNS increases likelihood of the entity being perceived favorable by stakeholders. To that end, a goal of an organization's crisis response messaging should be to change, alter, or shape public's perceptions of the organization during the event, which we definitely witness with this case. With those members having interviews, yes, they were upset, yes, they were sad, but it's hard not to be jaded when you see them do that. They're there for the organization first because they are pandering to their stakeholders, which will make me also lean to the side of Scott Green, pandering to his stakeholders as well. Communication practitioners are more likely to use SNS to release news to audiences because the platform's accessibility, interactivity, and range of reach allow organizations to establish relationships and maintain active dialogue with various stakeholders that prove useful during a crisis. Messages originating from organizational sources are perceived as more credible than those shared by non-organizational sources. Organizations can employ two strategies to connect to their stakeholders via SNS messages, sense-making, and sense-giving. My PowerPoint is not cooperating. It's tired. 2 hours and 23 minutes so far. All right, sense making. SNS facilitates information seeking and using, a process known as sense making. Sense making is the collection, organization, and creation of representations of complex information sets that center on creating and supporting mental models dedicated to understanding a problem that needs a solution. Sense-making refers to the impact of external factors on an individual's ability to process information and construct meaning out of specific events. In other words, individuals identify reasons to justify a specific phenomenon. This process entails collecting and using information, developing reasonable meaning, and validating choices based on the meaning created. The unpredictable nature of a crisis raises high needs for sense-making during the event. As a result, sense-making provides a frame of reference to interpret the values of SNS as support for crisis communication professionals, which I find it funny that how sense-making is part of their crisis management. And when we're trying to make sense of the case, we're totally denied that. We're totally told it's not supposed to. People are complex. This case is complex. We're not going to look at ancillary facts that will help make sense of the case. So it's okay for these organizations to do that to help their reputation and to do damage control so they can make their stakeholders happy. But when the public tries to do it, the publics try to do it, it's not okay. I'm glad I found this thesis. And thank you for this thesis, even though I don't agree with it totally, of how they're using it to help with their reputation and for damage control. But it does show us that what they're doing is this. So they put it out there, as Bev likes to say, which I've also said on this channel, opening the door when it comes to that whole Palestinian. And there's a lot of Zionists within the fraternities, and they showed themselves within that time, publicly and on national news, and they said that we are here for them, this is what we're doing, you open the door. So this is them opening the door. And I have done this on this channel with sense making by looking into the fraternities and sororities and what happens within, just to get some type of sense of the how and why and what Bethany and Dylan did what they did. And it's looking, and I hate to say it, because I've given them a lot of grace, that they knew a lot more of what was going on than they are leading on, which I find to be, of course, a natural occurrence for them to do that because of what the type of organization they're in. But there comes to a point in your life where you have to make a decision of what to do is right, because what is right and what is wrong is wrong. So we'll see how this all unfolds, because the truth will come out. It will come out, no matter how ugly it is, no matter how unfavorable it looks for the victims and their families. It will come out, because that's how we learn. We learn from our mistakes. We learn on how we mishandle things, just like how Kaylee has said to her sister, you made a mistake. What did you do so I don't do it myself? It's part of learning. It's part of what's going on. And when you try to do things to try to hide and deceive and make your reputation okay, make it status quo, that's where things get ugly, in my opinion. Like how with the Reed case, they want to maintain their status quo of, we're not corrupt here, and we didn't do anything wrong, and we have fine officers in our community, and it doesn't look that way, and hasn't looked that way for a while. So who are the stakeholders that Bev Canone is leading towards to? Social network sites message tone. This study focused on two aspects of communication: content, or the information contained in the message that helps individuals respond to the crisis and make meaning of the event, and form, or how the message is delivered. Content and form were observed through a message's tone. A message's tone can be neutral, positive, or negative, and can influence individuals' perception or a particular situation or an organization. Content can be delivered through two message styles: narrative and non-narrative. To build our complete story, to build our narrative. Narrative messages refer to a communication style that is natural and engaging, that elaborates on events using a story format, including descriptive and informative details, characters and a plot, and judgments and opinions of other individuals. We had a PhD student from Pennsylvania come here, and he's going to get himself some rednecks. This style contrasts with non-narrative messages, which typically focus on information intended to explain, describe, or teach something and are grounded in logic and reason. Non-narrative messages are usually crafted with educational arguments and may include statistical evidence. Organizations are encouraged to establish their stance and presence during a crisis using narrative-style SNS messages. Narrative messages use a conventional human tone. Conversational human tone. A conversational human tone refers to organizational communication perceived by stakeholders as engaging and natural in style based on interactions between internal and external stakeholders. The engagement created by a conversational tone helps drive content and form. Content and form are achieved through techniques that treat stockholders as human. Techniques include text that makes communication more pleasant, and organization, owning its mistakes, providing timely feedback, and directly responding to criticism with an uncritical approach. Conversational human tone is more useful for online engagement with publics. SNS messages and crisis communication that use the human voice and first-person narratives come off as more personal and sociable than those without personal stories and thoughts. Narrative messages used lived experiences and have two benefits. First, narrative messages enhance relational trust with stakeholders. Second, narrative messages help with persuasion because individuals do not focus on the persuasive intent of the communication. Narrative messages provide a form that engages with stakeholders in a personal manner and potentially increase the intended influence of the organization's message over individuals' perceptions on a particular situation. Crisis communication, crisis management, and SNS in fraternities and sororities. Crisis in fraternities and sororities. While fraternities and sororities provide members opportunities for involvement in their communities, personal and professional growth, and leadership experiences, they can foster environments that encourage and sustain high-risk behaviors that lead to crisis. In the past 8 years, multiple fraternities and sororities have encountered crisis. Some examples include the 2013 death of a first-year student at Barak College while joining a fraternity, which landed 3 men in jail and barred from the National Fraternity from conducting business in the state of Pennsylvania. In 2015, a video depicting members of a fraternity sing a chant that stated they will not. We went over this already. And then here is a recent one. Recently, in 2021 of March, a Bowling Green State University student died following alleged alcohol-related hazing activities while joining a fraternity. And why don't you list the fraternity, please? Although there are multiple examples of crisis situations in fraternities and sororities, numerous searches across various academic databases did not yield scholarship focus on crisis communication. Yep, we went through this already. So 2 additional articles appeared in AFA's peer-reviewed publications, Oracle. One article explored how online news media depict fraternities and sororities and affirmed a need for fraternal organizations to control narratives shared about them in social media by collaborating with media outlets. The second article recommended fraternities and sororities follow best practices for social media use utilized by nonprofit organizations instead of higher educational institutions, and use social media to promote positive messages and condemn negative behaviors. Both publications address the local chapter level and national and international level of fraternities and sororities interchangeably. This study focused specifically on the national and international level of organizations. All right, so we went over the academic database results, including hazing, alcohol consumption, sexual assault. We went through all of this already. Outcomes of crisis range from loss of life, emotional trauma. The theoretical framework. It advocates for a crisis response based on responsibility because of the threat of the organization's reputation. We went over the media ecology and the space biases. About McLuhan's, we talked about the importance of cool media and hot media, and the importance of using strategies to how the delivery is important through hot or cold. The situational crisis communication theory outlines 3 crisis clusters: victim, accidental, and intentional. Okay, let's do this right here. All right, so additionally, Combs states that while in most crises, the news media controls crisis framing, crises that take place predominantly online are framed by individuals posting crisis-related information via the internet. Both assertions align with scholarship on content, and form and message tones, particularly the use of conversational human tone to engage stakeholders and influence their perceptions during crisis. SCCT outlines 3 crisis clusters: victim cluster, accidental cluster, and intentional cluster. Under the victim cluster, the organization is considered a victim of the crisis, attribution of crisis responsibility is weak, and reputational damage is mild. Example of victim cluster crisis include natural disasters, rumors, product tampering, and workplace violence. Crises that fall under the accidental cluster include challenges, accidents, and product harm caused by technical error. In this category, crisis responsibility attribution is minimal and the reputation damage is moderate. The intentional cluster includes human error accidents, product harm caused by human error, and 3 categories of organizational misdeeds: misdeeds without injuries, misdeeds caused by management misconduct, and misdeeds that result in injuries. This is what I believe this is on the off-campus sorority home. In this category, crisis responsibility attribution is strong and reputational damage is severe. Table 1 provides more details of the crisis types as identified by Combs. So here are the crisis types by crisis clusters. So victim cluster, in this crisis types, the organization is also a victim of the crisis. So we went through that. So accidental, which is unintentional. Stakeholders claim an organization is operating in an inappropriate manner. Technical error accidents, technical error product harm. So preventable cluster here. And these crisis types, the organization knowingly placed people at risk, took inappropriate actions, or violated a law regulation. So I want to say this is under what happened at 1122 Queen. Strong attributions of crisis responsibility equals severe reputation threat. Human error accidents, human error causes in industrial accidents, human error product harm, human error causes a product to be recalled. Organizational misdeed with no injuries. We're going to look at organization misdeed management misconduct. Laws or regulations are violated by management, which could be the 8 hours of waiting to call 911. Organizational misdeed with injuries. Stakeholders are placed at risk by management and injuries occurred. Note, adapted from protecting organization reputation during a crisis, the development and application of situational crisis communication theory. Okay, that is a footnote. Yep, okay. So this is the methodology. So the SCCT, which we have read through, primary versus secondary. Primary crisis response strategy is you deny the crisis response strategy, you attack the accuser, you go into denial, you get a scapegoat, you have an excuse, you have a compensation, and an apology. Secondary crisis response is bolstering, which is reminder. Bolster up your attributes. Tell them how good the work has been going on and that you're a victim. So we went through all of that. The image restoration theory, which is denial, evade responsibility for the event, reduce offensive of the event. All right, so this goes into that more. So here's the methods. So they went ahead and they did a study of 4 individual cases, 2 fraternities and 2 sororities. We went through the questions already. What role does the use of social network sites play in creating crisis in fraternities and sororities? The methodology approach, this case study method. We went through all of this already. The qualitative content analysis. So let's see what they say what qualitative content is. Qualitative content analysis defined as a research method for the subjective interpretation of the content of text data through the systemic classification. Interpretation of the content of text data through the systemic classification process of coding and identifying themes or patterns. Qualitative content analysis is used to closely examine language and organize large volumes of text according to similar meanings. Qualitative content analysis is highly systematic and calls for the study of all parts of material relevant to the research questions and provides a coding structure. Third, qualitative content analysis is flexible, allowing for the coding frame to match the material. Qualitative content analysis developed out of the quantitative content analysis. Schreier notes, while content analysis has its roots in the early part of the 20th century, there is evidence of systematic text analysis conducted hundreds of years before on Bible scriptures. In the late 19th century, the first systematic newspaper analysis was published, and in the early decades of the 20th century, content analysis was honed as a tool for empirical social research through the analysis of newspaper articles, and the method was further developed by the emergence of mass media and public opinion and the study of Nazi propaganda during World War II. Very true. Initially, content analysis was established as a quantitative method, placing importance on the coding frequency and count for a particular theme, but soon an opposing perspective emerged based on a holistic approach that emphasized the complexities of meaning and accounted for context. Even within the qualitative tradition, different perspectives on content and analysis exist. Heisch and Shannon described three distinct approaches to achieving a qualitative content analysis: a conventional, which is used in studies seeking to describe a phenomenon where existing theory or scholarship on the subject is limited; directed, used by a researcher to extend conceptually or validate a theoretical framework on a phenomenon that is incomplete or could use additional explanation; and summative, used to analyze text to understand and interpret its contextual use. The specific approach is determined by the theoretical framework used, the researcher's interest, and the problems being studied. The exploratory nature of the study was best suited for a conventional content analysis. The aim of the study was to analyze the role of SNS in creating crisis in fraternities and sororities, and how the organizations use SNS in their crisis communication and crisis management strategies. As previously indicated, the research literature on the topic is limited. Heisch and Shannon described two challenges with this approach. First, a researcher using this approach may fail to fully understand the context, which impacts the identification of key categories. Second, this approach could be confused with grounded theory or phenomenology, while a conventional content analysis, grounded theory, and phenomenology allow insights to emerge from the data. Conventional content analysis does not seek to develop a new theory or describe in key details lived experiences. All right, hang in there. We're almost there. Goodness gracious. So semi-structural interviews. Interviews are essential sources of evidence to understand case studies that address human affairs and behavioral events. Interviews are guided conversations that require the researcher to follow the line of inquiry reflected in their interview protocol and ask their questions in an unbiased manner. Describe three types of interviews. There's in-depth interview, focus interviews, and surveys. In-depth interviews allow researchers to collect information from key respondents, including facts about the case and their opinions on the subject over an extended period of time. Focus interviews are used to obtain information from respondents over a short period of time, such as an hour, and require closer adherence to an interview protocol. And surveys use more structured questions and produce quantitative data. This study used focused interviews. Focus interviews provide the best option to collect data from participants, considering the potential time constraints and availability of interviewees. A semi-structured interview format was used to obtain information. Semi-structured interviews have the freewheeling quality of informal but with some guidance in the form of an interview guide. The use of an interview protocol gives semi-structured interviews a directed and informal quality that is helpful for situations when the researcher may not have multiple opportunities to interview a person. The guide provides an interview protocol complements the qualitative content analysis reduction of data to only include information that directly relates to research questions. Data collection methods. Yin identified 6 sources of evidence frequently used in conducting case studies. 1. Documents. 2. Archival records. 3. Interviews. 4. Direct observations. 5. Participant observations. And 6. Physical artifacts. And these are all, when you think of documents, yes. Letters, email, correspondence, calendars, diaries, meeting agendas, minutes, administrative records, formal evaluations. Archival records include computer files, records, public use files, service records, organizational records, maps, charts. Interviews of, a conversation, direct observation, relevant behaviors, environmental conditions that help explain a phenomenon. Participant observations assumes various roles with a case study engaging with the events studied, and physical artifacts, objects collected and examined as part of the study. Help. Pretty much what we're doing here on this channel. This is what we're doing. All right, so we're going to skip ahead. And they they tell you how they conduct the interview. The respondent's participation is voluntary. The session is being recorded. All information will be kept confidential in a secure location. The researcher will report all findings without respondent's name or any identifying information. The researcher reviews the information consents, and the researcher will keep all responses in a secured, password-protected location. It was via Zoom, and it lasts between 30 to 60 minutes. So the following questions were used to help answer the study's research questions. 1, what role did SNS play in the development of the situation? 2, please describe the organization's response to the situation as it happens. Please list the stakeholders the organization communicated with during the situation. What communication channels did the organization use to communicate with stakeholders during the situation? And what communication channels did the organization use to communicate with stakeholders after the situation? Please describe the types of messages used to communicate with stakeholders after the situation. And 4th, in your own words, how would you describe the situation experienced by the organization? How do you think the situation began? And looking back at the situation, how do you think it affected the organization? And what do you think are some key lessons you and the organization learned from this situation? The researcher has been involved in the fraternity and sorority industry for 22 years. He has worked as a campus-based fraternity and sorority professional at various colleges and universities, and has volunteered for multiple fraternities and sororities, as well as umbrella councils. He was a staff person at the headquarters of National Sorority. The researcher is currently a full-time employee at the international headquarters of his fraternity. Prior to this role, he served his fraternity as a volunteer leader at the local, regional, international level. For this reason, his fraternity was not included in the study, which is why they didn't include the other fraternity, I'm assuming. The researcher's experience had the potential to create bias in his approach to the study. For this reason, he maintained an open mind during interviews. He looked for concepts that provided opportunities for deeper reflection on the topic. The questions in the interview protocol were intended to seek additional context that may or may not be available to individuals outside of the fraternity or sorority. And the nature of the semi-structured interviews allow the researcher to ask follow-up questions. Follow-up questions were asked to obtain information that could provide additional context to assist with data analysis. The questions were asked in a manner that minimized opportunities for the researcher to insert his bias and lead participants toward the researcher's desired outcome. Follow-up questions asked for examples that would either be positive or negative to prevent steering the respondent's answers toward either direction. So I can definitely see someone doing this in an objective form, which has been my approach, to kind of keep myself out of it, keep my emotions out of it, keep my thoughts out of it, and look at it from an objective point of view, an observational point of view. And then I would put my own thoughts, feelings, ideas in there, but my approach is always objective first. It's hard to do. It takes practice, but anyone can do it once you practice it. But you really have to know what your own biases is. You have to know what's your own, the way you lean towards things. And you have to catch yourself, like how they were saying here, not to have them lean more towards a positive or a negative response. You have to just remain almost like, I wouldn't say a flat affect, but just a neutral affect. Researcher avoided phrasing questions that may indicate to the participants he sought agreement with a specific idea, such as, "Don't you think?" Once the researcher completed the interview, he thanked the participant for their time. The researcher turned off the recording device and informed the respondent of the action. The researcher asked the respondent if they had any additional comments that they did not share during the interview, and the researcher did this to gain insights respondents may not have felt comfortable sharing during the recorded interview, and the researcher did not include information provided by participants after the conclusion of their interviews as part of their interview processes or responses. Instead, answers given by participants after the conclusion of their interviews were used to provide additional context to analyze data. So how they got their sources, how they researched their participants. They went to let's see here. A crisis, as defined in Chapter 2, is an unpredictable event that is perceived by stakeholders to pose a threat to the regular operations of an entity, as the potential adversely affect stakeholders by generating negative outcomes that can impact the organization, the industry, its products, services, or reputation, and leaves the organization leadership with limited time to respond to the issue, thus requiring decisive and immediate solutions. The participants selected for the study experienced events that fit the aforementioned definition. The study examined untoward or emergency events along with activities that caused the events. Activities are appropriate units to examine because they are the doings of individuals or groups, extended social performances, often ritualistic, exacted in specific settings and time periods. The activities analyzed have been exposed primarily through content disseminated via SNS. The study was guided by purposeful sampling because of the flexibility the strategy afforded the study to include cases whose activities were essentially to understanding a process, concept, or established theory. So we're going to jump ahead because there's a lot of information here. It's really good information. But let's just jump ahead to participant composition. A two-step process was used to select cases for this study. First, because we're at now 2 hours and 54 minutes. First, a search via the internet search engine Google was conducted to generate a list of potential cases. This list was narrowed down to 4 cases using the selection criteria outlined in the previous section. Once the 4 cases were selected, the researcher contacted volunteer organizational leaders or headquarters staff who dealt with the crisis to secure an interview. Cases were confirmed after interviews were secured. Based on the selection criteria, the following fraternities and sororities were identified as participants. So Alpha Phi, which is Kaylee's sorority, January of 2018. 1 graduate member from the Sororities University of Alabama chapter appeared in 2 videos uploaded to SNS using the word and other expletives. Lambda Chi Alpha Fraternity, April of 2018, an undergraduate member from the fraternity, California Polytech State University, San Luis Obispo, appeared in a photograph with his face painted black. The Photograph was posted to SNS, followed by a second photograph of chapter members calling themselves gangsters and wearing stereotypical urban gangster attire associated with people of color. Delta 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 sorority, which I want to say is at both University of Idaho and Washington State University. January of 2019, an undergraduate member from the Sororities University of Oklahoma chapter recorded a video of an individual wearing black paint on her face who called herself, the video was posted on SNS. Lambda Phi Epsilon Fraternity, May of 2020, culturally insensitive messages from a GroupMe chat between undergrad members of the New York University chapter were exposed via SNS. These cases were intentionally selected because they occurred in 4 different geographical areas of the country: Alabama, California, Oklahoma, and New York. This current study to highlight that a racist, culturally insensitive act can occur anywhere in the country instead of in a specific geographic location. This avoids contributing to a perception that racist, culturally insensitive behaviors are more prevalent in specific parts of the country. Totally understand that. So they talk about the coding and the categories, the reliability, the ethical consideration, and the limitations. So this kind of goes over what we just went over, but a little bit more detail. So here are the case summaries. Peep her finsta, Alpha Phi in the case of racist rant. Alpha Phi International Fraternity is a historically white Greek letter organization founded on October 10, 1872 at Syracuse University by 10 female students who were among the first female students admitted into Syracuse University. Alpha Phi is a sorority that uses the term fraternity as part of its official language because the word sorority was coined 4 years after the organization's embellishment. This study will refer to Alpha Phi as sorority. Alpha Phi is an international organization headquartered in Evanston, Illinois, with chapters across the United States and Canada. Currently, the sorority has 173 collegiate chapters, 131 alumni communities, and a global network of more than 250,000 members. The sorority's mission states, Alpha Phi is a loyal sisterhood of women courageously pursuing limitless excellence. The Beta Mu chapter at the University of Alabama was chartered in 1932. The case overview includes an interview with Lindsay, who served on the organizational leadership team at the time of the crisis. They served in a role that had some form of responsibility with the implementation of Alpha Phi's crisis response. Pre-crisis, in January of 2018, days before Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, Harley Barber, a white female student and member of the Beta Mu chapter of Alpha Phi sorority, appeared in a video using that word. She posted the video to her Finstagram account, a made-up word that makes fake Instagram, a secondary profile in the SNS Instagram that the user creates with the intent to keep it a secret. In this video, Ms. Barber is seen on screen turning off a faucet and saying, "We do not waste water. We do not waste water because of people in Syria." What in the fuck? I love how I act like I love black people because I fucking hate. So, that's really interesting. I fucking hate. But I just saved the effing by shutting that water off. Oh my God. Wow. This has kind of a Zionist feel to it. A Twitter user with the handle @TabisBag posted the video on January 16, 2018 at the time of the study. Tabis's account was suspended. The video received negative feedback. In response to the critiques, Ms. Barber recorded and uploaded a second video to her Finstagram, where she reportedly used the N-word and expletives to address the criticism garnered by the first post. "I've wanted to be an Alpha Phi since fucking high school, and nobody fucking understands how much I love Alpha Phi. And now someone wants to save my Finsta because I said, you know what? Blank, blank, blank. I don't care if it's Martin Luther King Day. I'm in the South now, bitch. So everyone can fuck off. I'm from New Jersey, so I can say as much as I want. In the video, another woman is heard advising Miss Barber against posting the video. She posted the video on January 15th, Martin Luther King Day Jr. This video was also recorded and shared by Twitter users. As mentioned earlier, @Tabisback account was suspended. There is no data available to determine the reach of the original video, like the total number of views, likes, or comments, because Ms. Barber's Finstagram account was private at the time, and her fake Instagram account was deleted shortly after the videos were exposed. Though Ms. Barber's Finstagram account was deleted and @Tabisback's account was suspended, Twitter user @TurniqueSheed posted the second video to Twitter, with the caption, "Meet white supremacist Harley Barber. She's a University of Alabama Alpha Phi member, and she is from New Jersey. She goes on a vile anti-black rant while her fellow white supremacist girlfriend giggling in the background." Since its posting, the video garnered 1.3 million views, 9,099 retweets, was quoted in other users' tweets 2,301 times, and 8,921 users liked the video. Figure 3 shows a post from another Twitter user, @PageBTurnham, that come on. Right here, meet. So you went through this already. And this is a tweet from University of Alabama. This is outrageous. My son was just accepted to University of Alabama. Guess where he won't be attending? @Roll Tide, @Alpha Phi, @U of Alabama, @Alpha Phi Beta Mu. The video drew backlash from various stakeholders, including students, community members, and alumni. Figure 4 is a screenshot posted by the Twitter user. Okay, so you saw those. So international headquarters websites. Other users soon began to tag the sorority official Twitter handle to demand the organization take immediate action. So here it is. Do ya thing, Twitter. So here is the Alpha Phi International Fraternity, the address for general inquiries, recruitment, so on and so forth. And then the tweets tag the official Twitter handle for Alpha Phi here. Pressure was mounted by individuals within the university and influential alumni. Another Twitter user, former UA Football and National Football League player Landon Collins, tweeted a message to Alpha Phi that recommended the sorority take note and be wary of the company you keep, for they are a reflection of who you are and who you want to be. Figure 6 shows Collins' full tweet. The incident drew national media attention. Ms. Barber's actions were the subject of a segment on a nationally syndicated radio show based out of New York, Revolt. During one of the show's segments dedicated to calling out individuals who engage in unacceptable behaviors, the host discussed Ms. Barber's case and mentioned her affiliation with Alpha Phi. Tweet from former UA football player, NFL player, directed at Alpha Phi. Alpha Phi, be wary of the company you keep, for they are a reflection of who you are or who you want to be. Harley Barber didn't wake up this morning and decide to spew racist rhetoric for the first time in her life. Therefore, I believe I speak on behalf of my brothers and myself when I say the Bama football team does not need the support, cheers, or high fives of anyone who condones this types of intolerant, hateful behavior. Built by Bama. At the time of the study, Beta Mu chapter Alpha Phi had one previously documented diversity-related issue. In 2015, the chapter found itself in some controversy over a recruitment video they created and shared across social media. The video was criticized for being racially homogeneous, hyper-feminine, and objectifying of women. Though the incident with Ms. Barber caught Alpha Phi by surprise during our interview, Lindsay said the situation was preventable. There you go. Lindsay thought the sorority could have anticipated this type of incident based on past experiences with similar issues. From Lindsay's perspective, the organizational leadership team could have interpreted these issues as signs of large problems to address within Alpha Phi. Crisis response. I mean, it was pure crisis mode, Lindsay said during our interview as they described the impact of Ms. Baker's action. Lindsay added, I will say, this didn't make anyone proud. No one was happy that the situation happened. It was a very difficult time. I mean, it's not a positive situation to be in, Lindsay shared. Dealing with this speedily was what everybody really wanted to do. To expedite the process, according to Lindsay, Alpha Phi had a personnel dedicated to working with the press, individuals directly managing the actual incident with the member, the chapter and the advisors and team members coordinating communication efforts with local, regional, and international leadership. On January 16, 2018 at 7:04 p.m., Alpha Phi's official Twitter handle tweeted at Tabac and at U of Alabama a short message announcing the termination of Ms. Barber's membership in the sorority. At the time of the study, the message was retweeted 427 times, quoted in other tweets 124 times, and liked by 1,456 Twitter users. This tweet seems part of the sorority's effort to deal with this incident speedily, which I don't agree with. If they saw that was happening and they could see that was prevented, yes, go ahead and do your little crisis management for the press, but what do you do internally? What type of ways and actions and behaviors do you do so that this type of behavior and thought process is not accepted within that sorority or on that campus? And this is what I was saying. Like, if you think that this is just okay to use this as a smart way of just dealing with your problems, like a Band-Aid, that's not okay. I understand why they do it and for the need to do it, but it's not addressing the underlying problem. It's not addressing the need for this to not happen again, to change behavior, to change thought processes so that you become actual leaders and become pillars of your community. Not by learning how to, brush it over, hide it, and move on. And then they just show this. So post-crisis learning. Let's see what they do here. Lindsay noted 4 key takeaways from the crisis. First, Alpha Phi thought about steps to support the Beta Mu chapter in the aftermath of the crisis. They said there was definitely a conversation about supporting the chapter. That was the takeaway of like how we continue to support them when they're being targeted. Okay, that's not really helping. She noted Beta Mu chapter members who were not involved with the incident were singled out by individual on campus because of Ms. Barber's actions. Well, yeah, because you are the company you keep. Alpha Phi also discussed supporting the Beta Mu chapter's future new member recruitment efforts. Second, so making sure that we keep getting recruitments, not just... Second, Lindsay observed that while the communication efforts to mitigate the crisis were enacted, the communication efforts among the staff in relation to the event were disjointed. If we had all sat in a room for like 15 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day, here's the brief update. Here's what's going on. I think there would have been more knowledge of what could have happened. Third, Lindsay observed that fraternities and sororities must address issues beyond the surface level if they want to continue to do business. Thank you, Lindsay. In Alpha Phi's case, Lindsay noted the sorority focused its post-crisis recovery efforts on supporting the members affected, while efforts to identify the root cause of issues were minimal. There were no consideration of the incident's impact on others beyond the organization. I don't think everybody realized the problem or wanted to admit the problem initially, they said. Lindsay said, I think if there's something that organizations could do, it's critically looking at that and addressing all of the problem versus just this one fracture. Very good, Lindsay. Lindsay emphasized the importance of fraternities and sororities understanding their current state of affairs, fighting structural issues, and fixing the problems at the source. The next case underscores the lessons and adds the usefulness of properly planned and effectively executed communications efforts during a crisis. There needs to be punishment on the case of color wars. Lambda Chi Alpha Fraternity is a historically white Greek letter organization founded on November 2nd, 1909 at Boston College by 4 male students. The fraternity was founded on 7 principles: loyalty, duty, respect, service, stewardship, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Lambda Chi Alpha is an international organization headquartered in Carmel, Indiana, with chapters across the U.S. and Canada. The fraternity has 108 chapters, colonies, and almost 9,000 active members, and has initiated 300,000 members. This case reviews an incident at Pi Sigma Zeta at California Polytech State University, which was chartered in 1979. In Lambda Chi Alpha nomenclature, Zeta means chapter. Nomenclature, hence the name Phi Sigma Zeta. The term Zeta and chapter will be used interchangeably in this study. Come on, there we go. The case overviews includes an interview with Pat, who served on the organizational leadership at the time of the crisis. They served in the role with some level of responsibility with the implementation of Lambda Chi Alpha's crisis response, pre-crisis. On Saturday, April 7th, 2018, the Phi Sigma Zeta of Lambda Chi Alpha held a brotherhood event, which is a get-together intended to build relationships among members of the fraternity. This event was exclusive to Lambda Chi Alpha Phi Sigma Zeta members. The chapter's event coincided with Cal Poly's Polycultural Weekend, a program hosted by cultural organizations at Cal Poly to show prospective students around the campus. While at the Brotherhood event, Mr. Kyler Watkins, a white male student and member of Phi Sigma Zeta, or Pi Sigma Zeta, took a picture of himself dressed in all black with a face painted black. On Sunday, April 8, 2021, Mr. Watkins' picture was posted to SNS Facebook by the mother of a Cal Poly student who called out the chapter for the picture's content. According to KCBX-FM, a local radio station in San Luis Obispo, students said they received the photo via Snapchat Saturday afternoon, and a Cal Poly professor, who has asked not to be named, made a Facebook post Saturday evening saying the photo was sent to her by current and former students. Some students and members of the community have made comments on other Facebook posts, calling the photo unacceptable and racist. Other news outlets further clarified the source that exposed the photo. The post was made by Miss Monique Schonhott-Hocker, who told the San Luis Tribune, oh my goodness, posted the blackface photo to Facebook after Kali Pi professor sent it to San Luis. At the time of the incident, Ms. Schonhott-Hocker's daughter attended Cal Poly, and this incident prompted her to take action because she told the Tribune, "I'm just sick of the actions that are happening at Cal Poly. There's no consequences for any of their bad actions, and the racism is so thick there." Figure 9 shows the Facebook post credited while exposing the incident. As of this study, the post received 22 comments, 97 reactions from Facebook users that included: someone wrote, "And?" That's terrible. Horrific. Okay, gross. I hope it goes viral and they are all expelled and the frat closed. Fucking pieces of shit. The standard thumbs up, angry face, and laughing face reactions, and was shared 102 times. Pat recounted the moment they were notified of the incident. I remember receiving a phone call. This was on a Sunday towards the end of the day from one of my colleagues and said, "Hey, this just came to light. You know this blackface incident? Photos have been surfacing and ongoing around social media showing our men in blackface and just wanted you to be aware. because the chapter president will be reaching out to you shortly to get your advice on how to handle this. On April 8th, Pi Sigma Zeta released a statement to Cal Poly's newspaper, the Mustang News, in response to the negative feedback from stakeholders. Figure 10 shows the chapter's full statement. In the statement, the chapter apologizes for on April 8th, on behalf of the brothers, we would like to sincerely apologize for any harm caused by the photograph. Blah, 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 blah. Really, that's all I can do right now. I did talk to the chapter president. He kind of talked me through what was happening. They were part of a color wars thing, and their team was black color. Oh, jeez, okay. That's, okay. That's how the, what do they say, deny, excuse. Later in the day, a second picture was posted on Instagram by a user who was Cal Poly 21 in the Greek letters. His profile. Figure 11 shows the second photograph. This photograph depicted members at the same Brotherhood event attended by Mr. Watkins standing in front of the charter house. She want a gangster, not a pretty boy. Wearing stereotypical urban gangster attire with a caption that read, "She want a gangster, not a pretty boy." So, dressed differently than they expressed in a press release apologizing for the blackface incident. An article in Newsweek stated, though the apology characterizes the costume as part of the Spirit Rally-like event, another social media photograph shows other members of the fraternity not dressed in the other colors that claim that Mr. Watkins painted his face black to support the team's color was invalidated by the second photo of members dressed in stereotypical urban gangster attire. So, this is from a Facebook user. A fraternity had a gangster theme party that included various racist costumes and a member wearing black face makeup. The fraternity's stupid excuse that literally nobody with half a brain believes is that they were on a different colored team for an activity and he was just showing his enthusiasm of Team Black. Are you kidding me? Nobody was painted for Team Green or purple or any other color. It's such a ridiculous, stupid excuse that anyone who made it believes it shouldn't be at or near higher education. In reference to the second photograph, but then, we found later on that one of the pictures that surfaced, they were, throwing up kind of gang signs. And in our minds, we said, okay, this is not really about this color wars thing. It's a little bit deeper than that. So I think that was kind of their cover and kind of what they were telling us. It came out later with these pictures were surfacing that. It was offensive and hurtful, and that's what stokes the fire. So a lot of people were upset, and they said they should be expelled. So let's do the crisis response, and then I'm going to cut it there because we're at 3:19. On April 9th, 2019, Lambda Chi Alpha sent an internal email to members discussing the Pi Sigma Zeta crisis. And that message, titled "A Message to All Brothers, Your Individual Actions Reflect on the General Fraternity." They represent the international organization Lambda Chi Alpha. Provide members with their best practices to help them balance their individual actions with the fraternity's expectations. A link to this message was posted to the fraternity's official Twitter account. The links to the message in the news article and the Twitter post are no longer active. However, there is an edited version on the article official fraternity website under the news section, also titled "A Message to All Brothers, Your Individual Actions Reflect on the General Fraternity." This version of the article was edited to remove any reference of Phi Sigma Zeta and the incident at Cal Poly. This could have been done as part of the fraternity's efforts to move past this crisis and focus on upholding the organizational values. Figure 12 is a screenshot of the Lambda Chi Alpha Twitter post with the message to the members, and Figure 13 is the actual message. So here, a message to all brothers. Your individual actions reflect the general fraternity. And then here is the message to all the brothers. And I'm not going to read this because it's just empty. But right here, Snapchat is the platform that has the most misconceptions as far as the life of a snap. Many people believe the picture they send to someone over Snap only lives for the 10 seconds it is visible to the other person. This is not true. Everything that is sent on Snapchat is stored in a media library and can be accessed at any point in the future. Not to mention, anyone you send it to can take a screenshot. So what's the moral of the story? Hide it better. So that's all I'm going to do. There are many, many more, unfortunately. And here are, so it's quite lengthy, very informative. It is very smart and clever, and yes, to use this in the way to hide these circumstances, I do not like. I feel like it's parasitic. I don't agree with it. I do agree with what some of the members were saying. Like, we didn't go after the underlying cause of this happening, because you're fostering this type of behavior. And if you're fostering racism, that is going to include violence. And we saw a very violent event happen at 1122 Queen. And that's not the first violent happening. There's been others that I posted on my my accounts of people getting burned, people sitting in a basement blindfolded, like 20 of them, more hazing. Another person has passed, and Alpha Phi was part of that, and that chapter ended up being shut down on that university's campus. So they're not addressing the underlying causes that are happening within these fraternities and sororities, even though their message is loyalty, integrity, respect, honesty. You can say those words, but you have to live those words. They have to be your actions. Actions speak louder than words. So that is it for this. Video. If you want me to continue, let me know. I will be happy to continue this on a different time, different place, different forum. Or if you want, I can just look through it and just skim through it next time. But I really felt I had to read through all of that because that was all very important to understand the thought process and the actions and the framework of how they handle these types of crisis events that happen on their campus. And we saw how they handled the four who were found, the four decedents at 1122, that 8 hours in between. It makes you think really more now about the stakeholders who are involved in this and why it all of a sudden changed from a targeted event of the four knowing who did this to them to now having a stranger do it. When they said in their own words, a stranger did not commit these acts. This was not a random act of violence. Thank you all for listening. My next video will be another research paper. After that, I will look into either doing a connections, dynamics, and timeline, or look into another Linda Lane with more grub truck, because several of you have pointed out 2 important moments that I have missed before, and you are correct on some of those. And I did hit some of that. I did hit on some of that with the interview with the Chapins and how she said, this is not some crazy love triangle. Part of me believes that, Ethan, he definitely, from what I've seen through other people's social media, he had other girlfriends prior to Zaina. It's going to be messy in college, having a relationship, especially being within the Greek system, it's going to be weird pressures and weird things people are going to do to try to break you two apart or to show how much you really want to be with each other. I can just naturally see that. Maybe something happened and Xana and Ethan, decided to move on and no longer be a part of that and just kind of stuck together. Or maybe Ethan broke up with someone and it was maybe too soon and he was with Xana. There's so many different scenarios that the two of them were a part of, that they handled it the best way that they could. And breakups can be messy, and getting together can be messy as well, and maintaining a relationship can be. It's not easy, it's difficult. So, with that being said, thank you all very much for listening to this. If you have made it this far, holy shit. It's impressive. Very impressive. I'm sure you learned a lot. I'm sure that when I was reading this to you, and those who've been following this case for a duration of time can recall how this case has been handled, how it's been used like a crisis management tool framework, more so than we need to find the killer and we need to get things going. And the amount of press and media were used to not only try to smooth the reputations over with the fraternities and sororities, but also to shed a light on members of those fraternities and sororities as well. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video and about this thesis, which it was very well done, even though I don't agree with how they're using it. But I guess you have to start somewhere. And hopefully more people in the positions of leadership within these organizations or within this industry will stick to their guns and speak louder and be more forceful in addressing the underlying causes that create these crises that happen. Until next time.
you.